On a busy morning street, students crowd the sidewalk on their way to school. Among them, Yusuke Yuki walks with his nose buried in a book, catching the attention of two classmates who notice a girl nearby wearing the uniform of a prestigious girls' school, unusual for this neighborhood. His friends tease him for being uptight and remind him to loosen up, while another scolds him for reading while walking. Yuki brushes it off with a quiet apology, unbothered by their jabs. Later, a sudden thought crosses Yuki's mind. Despite his serious nature, he admits to himself that he wants a girlfriend. Since his father's death in middle school, Yuki has worked part-time jobs to support himself. Romance never crossed his mind before. Survival always came first. Every night he studies late, determined to keep his scholarship, which covers both tuition and rent, while also holding on to the top rank in his class. Exhausted after another part-time shift, he eats a modest dinner alone. A wave of longing hits him unexpectedly, and he realizes his teenage years are catching up with him. Trying to concentrate on his equations, his mind keeps drifting back to the same wish, appearing even scrawled across his notebook mid-formula. Rain begins to fall over the town as Yuki walks home, a history textbook shielding his head from the downpour. Frustrated, he mixes up the names of Tokugawa shoguns with his own thoughts, muttering about wanting a girlfriend instead of studying properly. A tiny figure representing his distracted mind scolds him, warning that mixing up names will cost him on his upcoming exam. Under his umbrella, Yuki notices a silhouette standing atop an abandoned building despite the storm. Sensing something is wrong, he heads inside to investigate. Climbing through the neglected structure, his suspicion is confirmed as he steps out onto the rooftop. There, a girl in a red-ribboned uniform stands dangerously close to the edge, her hair soaked from the rain. Without hesitation, Yuki grabs her, shouting in disbelief as he pulls her back from the railing. The girl struggles against him, demanding to be released, but he refuses to loosen his grip, pinning her safely away from the edge. Rain streams down her face, mixing with tears as she stares back at him, her expression caught between sorrow and surprise. Catching his breath, Yuki studies her closely, quietly noting how striking she looks despite the situation, even as he questions what she was trying to do. Unsure how to handle things, he suggests contacting her parents or the police, while she remains silent beside him. She finally speaks, pleading with him to stop interfering, though her voice wavers between resistance and quiet surrender. As the rain continues, Yuki offers to share his umbrella, suggesting they find shelter first. Shivering, the girl reluctantly agrees, marking the beginning of their unexpected connection. Under the shared umbrella, Yuki blurts out that she can come to his place since he lives nearby, then quickly claims he was only joking. The girl stares back at him, quietly asking if he means it. Sitting alone in his room, Yuki grows anxious, wondering if she's used to situations like this while telling himself he simply couldn't leave her out in the rain. She sits stiffly on his bed, questioning how things ended up this way. When she emerges from the shower, Yuki straightens up and offers her a seat, visibly struck by how pretty she looks. She thanks him quietly for letting her clean up. An awkward silence settles between them as Yuki scrambles to think of something to say, unsure how to fill the space in his small apartment. He introduces himself as Yusuke Yuki and asks for her name in return. She answers softly, giving her family name, Hatsushiro, before adding her first name Kotori, in a near whisper. Yuki hesitates before addressing her directly, calling out to Hatsushiro and asking if she had really been about to jump. Sensing her discomfort, he quickly backtracks, telling her she doesn't need to answer, but she stays silent, unable to respond. Kotori finally admits she no longer has a reason to live, her words trailing into silence. Yuki realizes the weight of her confession and begins to worry that leaving her alone might lead her to try again, wondering desperately what he could do to stop that from happening. Acting on impulse, he blurts out a request for her to become his girlfriend, startling both of them with the sudden proposal. Kotori tilts her head in confusion, then explains that since he mentioned having no reason to live, she assumed dating someone might give his life more meaning. Fumbling to explain himself, he insists that wasn't his intention when he brought her home, though he awkwardly adds that she happens to be exactly his type. Embarrassed by his own words, he questions what he's even saying, while Kotori quietly asks if he liked her from the start. He admits he does now, apologizing for how blunt he sounds, but insists she's incredibly cute. Growing more serious, he tells her not to act like she has nothing worth living for, insisting that he genuinely wants her to be his girlfriend. Kotori's eyes well up as she remarks that he must feel uncomfortable around someone like her, but he simply turns away, telling her it's fine if she wants to leave. With tears in her eyes, she agrees to be his girlfriend, catching him completely off guard. Stunned, Yuki asks if she really means it, his voice cracking with disbelief. Kotori reflects that his blunt confession and honest words about her looks left her happy, admitting he's a genuinely nice person underneath his awkwardness. As the tension eases, Yuki tells her she can rely on him from now on, and she quietly agrees to consult him if she needs anything, closing their strange first meeting with a fragile sense of trust. Kotori hesitates before speaking, her voice quiet as she asks if he would let her stay there for a while, catching Yuki completely off guard. Flustered, he stammers that it should be fine since she's technically his girlfriend now, though he glances at her for reassurance that nothing about the situation is wrong. Overwhelmed with gratitude, he nearly drops to his knees thanking her, while Kotori simply tells him she has no problem with the arrangement, silently thinking to herself that she has nowhere else to return to anyway. Straightening up, she bows properly and asks him to take care of her once again, the formality making him tense up in surprise. With a bright, unguarded smile, Kotori introduces him warmly as her boyfriend, her expression completely different from the guarded look she wore on the rooftop. Caught off guard by her sudden warmth, Yuki fumbles his own words, comparing her to a flower before awkwardly asking her to take care of him in return. Sitting across from each other in his small room, the two share a quiet, hopeful smile, marking the start of an unexpected relationship neither of them had planned for. At his desk, Yuki quietly announces to himself that he now has a girlfriend, replaying Kotori's bright smile in his mind. Overwhelmed with excitement, he clutches his pencil tightly, barely containing the urge to jump out of his seat and shout the news to the world. He recalls how easily she laughed, and how the only things that came to her mind were happy thoughts, admitting to himself that he's never been interested in relationships before. Then a new question hits him. Now that he has a girlfriend, what exactly comes next? He turns to his classmate for advice, insisting he's being serious, only for her to ask if he ate something strange. Determined, he explains he genuinely wants to know the specifics of what couples usually do on dates. When she casually suggests something inappropriate, he immediately shuts her down, embarrassed by her directness. She teases him further, asking if he finally has a girlfriend, revealing herself as Shoko Otani, the class and manga club president. She calls his reaction predictable, watching him squirm under her teasing smile while he stammers out a vague confirmation. She suggests he could ask his girlfriend to hold hands or cook him a homemade meal. The idea strikes him hard, and he immediately fixates on the thought of holding hands. Walking down the hallway afterward, he wonders how he's supposed to bring this up naturally with Hatsushiro, repeating the words home-cooked meals and holding hands under his breath. Standing outside her door, he coaches himself to ask without pressuring her, psyching himself up before finally reaching for the doorknob. Kotori greets him warmly at the entrance, welcoming him home with a soft smile that immediately eases his nerves. She explains she waited by the door because she sensed he was almost home, while he apologizes for his earlier awkward behavior at school. She tilts her head gently, asking why he doesn't just go ahead and say what's on his mind. Nervously, he asks if he could try holding her hand, and after a moment of hesitation she quietly agrees. Their hands slowly move closer, fingers hovering just before making contact. Right at the final moment, Kotori flinches and pulls back, her whole body trembling slightly. She admits she's afraid of being touched, though she confesses that his gentle attempt still made her happy, thanking him sincerely for trying. He tells her there's no point in pushing forward if it doesn't make her comfortable, and she breaks down apologizing, explaining how terrified she still is of people despite knowing he's kind. Wiping her tears, she agrees to move forward slowly, and he reassures her they'll go at their own pace, gradually and steadily. She laughs weakly, joking about practicing hugs with a pillow until she's ready, and he smiles, telling her they'll try it together someday. She offers to cook him breakfast tomorrow instead, admitting that holding hands might still be out of reach for now, though she wants to make the girlfriend fantasy of home cooking come true for him. Yuki can barely contain his excitement about the next day, while Kotori shares his enthusiasm at the thought of finally cooking a homemade meal for her boyfriend. That night, his alarm sits ready at 5:59, ticking toward the moment he's been anticipating. The alarm blares, and he springs out of bed with the energy of a kid on a school trip, ready to greet the promised morning. He wonders if he woke up too early, then scolds himself internally for letting her sleep on the floor the night before, glancing over at her curled up on the futon. He remembers insisting the night before that she take the bed since he was the homeowner, recalling how she gets fixated on strange details like that. Watching her sleep, he admits to himself that he's curious about her expression, feeling a little guilty for wanting to peek, yet unable to resist looking anyway. Suddenly noticing something off, he leans closer and spots a bruise on her forehead, his expression shifting from curiosity to concern. In her sleep, Kotori mutters brokenly, repeating the word forgive as if caught in a nightmare, her voice trembling with distress. He gently reassures her not to worry and tells her to rest, though his own expression remains tense with worry. Before leaving for school, he quietly says his goodbye, glancing back one last time at her sleeping figure. At school, Utani greets him with her usual bluntness, noting that he's still studying as diligently as always despite everything going on in his life. She asks how yesterday went, and he explains that maintaining his top 5 ranking is critical, since losing it would cost him his scholarship entirely. When she asks if he managed to hold hands with Kotori, he admits he wasn't able to, prompting her to mock him playfully for being boring. Their conversation is interrupted by Ryota Fuji, the baseball team's energetic ace, who bursts in shouting Utani's name with his usual chaotic enthusiasm. She immediately shuts him down, though he brushes off the rejection completely, complimenting her appearance without missing a beat. When someone questions why he keeps trying despite constant rejection, he answers simply that he likes her, plain and straightforward, leaving her quietly affected by his persistence. Fuji suddenly turns to Yuki and asks if there's another girl he might be interested in besides Otani, catching him completely off guard. Otani jumps in casually, revealing that Yuki already has a girlfriend, sending Fuji into a shocked outburst demanding details. Fuji remarks that he always thought Yuki was too uptight and wished he'd enjoy his youth more, prompting Yuki to ask what exactly he means by that. Fuji suggests a double date sometime, while jokingly reminding Yuki to treat his girlfriend well, leaving Yuki quietly repeating the word to himself as if still processing the reality of it. Back home, Kotori greets him excitedly at the door, clearly proud and thrilled to say the words welcome home for the first time as his girlfriend. Yuki arrives home from his part-time job, admitting to himself how nice it feels to be greeted by someone waiting for him. Kotori apologizes for not keeping her promise to cook breakfast, but he brushes it off gently, telling her she can cook whenever she has the time. Despite her worries about the meal being too simple, Yuki digs in eagerly, savoring every bite while silently declaring that the moment he'd been waiting for has finally arrived. Watching him enjoy her cooking so much, Kotori blushes and admits she got carried away eating herself, while he can't help thinking how cute her reaction is. As she passes him a cup, their fingers brush briefly, and he asks if he can have seconds, to which she happily agrees. Reaching for something himself, he ends up knocking it slightly and quickly reassures her he'll grab it on his own, thanking her again. When she checks if he's okay, their sudden closeness catches him off guard. In a quiet moment afterward, Yuki gently takes her hand, testing whether she can handle his touch this time. She insists she isn't afraid, though her trembling fingers suggest otherwise, and he notices the effort it takes for her to stay calm. Overwhelmed with happiness, she asks if they can stay like this a little while longer, savoring the warmth of the moment together. She admits softly that his hand feels warm, and he watches her with quiet affection as the school building looms outside the window, marking a shift from their private world back to reality. Back in the classroom, Yuki slumps over his desk, gushing to Otani about how cute his girlfriend is, while she responds with complete indifference, clearly unbothered by his lovesick rambling. Yuki proudly showed off his lunch, his eyes glowing with anticipation. He held the bento as though it were something precious. At the desk nearby, Otani briefly looked up, unimpressed yet slightly curious about his enthusiasm. Holding the bento carefully in both hands, Yuki reflected on the work behind it. Hatsushiro made his meals for him every morning. Wanting to express his gratitude, he turned to Utani for some advice. As she listened quietly, he explained that he hoped to give Hatsushiro a present, something considerate that she would truly enjoy. Utani suggested an idea while leafing through a magazine. A teddy bear struck her as a simple but charming option. In her imagination, a romantic manga scene played out with flowers and sparkling effects. Later on, Hatsushiro accepted the teddy bear with surprise and delight. Her joyful expression brightened the room. Overcome with embarrassment, Yuki flushed deeply. Hatsushiro stopped, caught off guard by the question. Nobody had ever asked what she herself actually wanted. Yuki softly gave her the opportunity to choose a present as thanks. Moved by the gesture, Hatsushiro returned a warm smile. Gratitude swelled inside her, even though she did not know how to answer. Although she kept smiling, her eyes dropped. Taking a gift still felt difficult. Yuki was already paying for the meals they shared. To her, that kindness by itself was more than sufficient. Yuki immediately reassured her. He insisted it would not trouble him because he had prepared for this occasion. Hatsushiro nevertheless declined quietly, uncertain whether she deserved that much generosity. She reached forward and carefully held both of his hands. Her tone softened as she admitted that simply hearing him compliment her food was enough. Yuki could only stare, quietly touched by what she said. Smiling gently, Hatsushiro kept Yuki's hands in hers and told him everything was all right. The quiet firmness in her words instantly eased the atmosphere between them. Their joined fingers remained together. From that point on, she gradually opened up more, accepting these small moments of closeness. Yuki noticed the change in silence as his feelings slowly grew stronger. Afterward, Hatsushiro guided him into the kitchen. Omarisi was on the menu that night, one of his comforting favorites. Her cheerful voice carried through the room as she started cooking with practiced ease. They sat together for dinner, sharing warmth and laughter. Yuki was amazed by the flavor and praised every mouthful. He watched her take a sip from her cup while thinking quietly. For all her ability, kindness, and charm, she still never viewed herself the way he did. Hatsushiro's smile awakened something inside Yuki. His chest tightened as he realized he wanted to make her happy through more than ordinary daily kindness. At an electronics shop, he hesitantly looked through the smartphones. He had originally intended to surprise her with one. Her unusual lifestyle came back to mind. Phones were practically essential now, yet she owned none. Only a week had passed since she moved in, and neither her relatives nor her school had contacted her. Back at the apartment, Yuki sat opposite Hatsushiro and unpacked something else. A game console rested on the table, an impulsive purchase inspired by memories of an old favorite. He described what it was for, uncertain how she might respond. A distraction during study breaks could be useful, he figured. Hatsushiro watched from nearby, her face difficult to read but her attention fixed completely on the small gift. Hatsushiro paused when Yuki offered the controller. Her widened eyes showed more surprise than resistance, as though she was unsure what he wanted her to do. Yuki gave her a calm smile and invited her to play. She slowly nodded while holding the controller with both hands. What seemed like a simple invitation became unexpectedly meaningful to them. Her fingers moved clumsily across the controls. It was clear that everything was new to her. Yuki patiently watched from across the room, noticing both her concentration and the seriousness of her effort. The title Legend of the Holy Spear 3 appeared on the screen. The two sat beside each other with controllers in their hands. After playing for a while, Hatsushiro bowed her head in embarrassment and apologized for slowing him down. Yuki simply chuckled and assured her that beginners struggled at first. Their gaming session ended in an easygoing mood. When the game was over, Hatsushiro quietly admitted how she felt. She had honestly enjoyed playing together. Seeing her cheerful face, Yuki knew the present had accomplished exactly what he wanted. She dropped her gaze and apologized again for being troublesome. Before those thoughts could grow worse, he leaned closer and casually told her she could use her own save file whenever she played alone. That small consideration brought another smile to her face. She hugged the controller to her chest and nodded, clearly touched by the offer. As Hatsushiro concentrated on the controls, Yuki stretched and moved aside. Watching her learn made him reflect quietly. He wondered when video games had become a source of comfort for him as well. Utani noticed the change immediately at school. While eating, she teased him openly by calling Hatsushiro his girlfriend. Yuki could not answer, left only with a flushed face and a racing heart. Utani kept teasing, pointing out how naturally he had chosen something specifically for Hatsushiro. Her observation cut through Yuki's normal self-doubt and took him by surprise. He rubbed his head and wondered whether he had gone too far. Utani calmly remarked that thinking about other people came naturally to him, even if he never noticed it himself. Their discussion gradually became serious. Utani pointed out how strange it was for someone their age to have neither a smartphone nor any gaming experience. Hatsushiro was clearly unusual in that regard. Taking a drink, she asked how long Hatsushiro had gone without hearing from either her family or school. The question hung between them, carrying a concern neither one said directly. Yuki answered with complete silence. He had not told her everything, especially not about Hatsushiro's bruises or the moment when she had nearly jumped. Yuki hesitated to interfere because digging into Hatsushiro's history without permission felt wrong. Utani offered to help, proposing that they discreetly ask someone connected to her school. At home, Yuki thought about Hatsushiro with affection. The girl who greeted him with dinner every night had already become someone precious and irreplaceable in his life. Still doubtful, Yuki ultimately chose patience. If Hatsushiro ever decided to explain the truth, he would listen. Until then, respecting her silence seemed like the right thing to do. Utani disagreed and pushed the issue further. Some people secretly want others to step in precisely because they cannot say what they need themselves. Her unusually serious tone made the point harder to dismiss. Yuki listened to her in silence. Utani leaned back with folded arms and calmly stood by her opinion. She did not sound argumentative, but her certainty gave him something important to consider. Her quiet warning stayed in Yuki's mind. Many people wanted to speak yet lacked the courage to begin. He started wondering whether silently waiting was actually the best choice. That concern remained with him after work. Hatsushiro had adjusted well to her new life, yet the mystery surrounding her past still had no answer. Her smile was different now. It appeared more naturally and no longer seemed as guarded as before. Yuki had noticed the change, especially whenever she laughed freely around him. When he returned home, Yuki opened the door with his usual greeting. Hatsushiro welcomed him with her familiar bright expression. He had only started answering when everything changed. The apartment suddenly went silent. Yuki rounded the corner and stopped cold. Hatsushiro was lying motionless on the floor amid scattered kitchen utensils and dark stains near the cooking area. Shock locked him in place when he saw Hatsushiro lying there. Panic rushed through him as the reality of the scene sank in almost immediately. Hatsushiro slept deeply against Yuki's shoulder, one hand loosely holding his. Her breathing stayed calm and even. Remaining on the floor, Yuki watched her with stunned disbelief. She continued sleeping peacefully while the kitchen around them remained a mess, with partly cut vegetables scattered everywhere. He picked up the knife she had been using and finally understood what happened. Hatsushiro had fallen asleep while chopping, leaving a tomato half sliced and its juice spread across the floor. Meanwhile, Utani reflected calmly on what silence could mean. Some people desperately want to speak but cannot. Others quietly wait for someone else to step in when they are unable to describe their problems. Afterward, Yuki waited beside Hatsushiro's bedside. She was now sleeping safely beneath the blanket. Questions still remained, but relief finally came. For the moment, she seemed unharmed, and that was enough. Morning light streamed through the window, while Yuki watched from beside the bed, sweat gathering on his forehead. Hatsushiro had remained asleep and motionless for a full 12 hours. In the kitchen, Yuki looked around and tried to understand why she was so exhausted. His eyes moved toward the game console as he remembered how deeply absorbed she had become. Clearly, playing for too long had worn her out. Eventually, Hatsushiro began to wake. She slowly sat upright and rubbed her eyes, still confused about where she was. Her memories suddenly returned. She gripped the bedding as she realized she had collapsed in the middle of preparing dinner. Embarrassment and confusion immediately crossed her face. Yuki's casual voice came from the bathroom. Hearing him, Hatsushiro quickly faced the sound. He calmly washed his face and behaved as though nothing particularly strange had happened. Hatsushiro lowered herself in a deep bow. Realizing she had fallen asleep while cooking filled her with guilt. From across the room, Yuki answered in a light-hearted way, making it clear she had no reason to feel ashamed. Still bothered by regret, she thought about her recent habits. Yuki spent his days working or studying while she had been playing games without any restraint. Her hands shook beside her. She stepped forward and promised she would completely stop gaming. Her voice was faint, but her posture showed firm determination. Yuki crouched in front of her with a broad smile. He plainly told her he was happy that she had enjoyed herself. There was no criticism in his reaction, only relief. Surprised, Hatsushiro raised her eyes toward him. His gentle reasoning completely surprised Hatsushiro. Having fun with games was not something wrong. Slowly she accepted his words with a quiet nod. Hatsushiro remained in place, still hesitant. With a trembling voice, she asked whether he was angry. Yuki softly reassured her, and only warned her not to push herself too far. His answer stayed kind and calm, not even a trace of irritation appeared. All Yuki wanted was for her to have fun while taking care of herself. The emotion became too much for her. Tears poured out as she dropped to the floor and began sobbing uncontrollably. Startled, Yuki hurried over with immediate concern. With every shaky breath, Hatsushiro finally let her emotions spill out. Her crying echoed through the room as freely as a child releasing fears that had been buried for years. Yuki quietly rested a hand on her head. He kept comforting her with slow, gentle pats and patiently stayed there until the crying finally ended. As Hatsushiro's sobs gradually weakened, Yuki continued patting her hair. Unsure what else might help, he offered something simple, his company until she felt ready to speak. The following day, Yuki happily ate his packed lunch while remembering their gaming session. Someone walked nearby as he kept talking without even looking up. Utani sipped her drink while listening with quiet amusement. Yuki enthusiastically praised Hatsushiro's charm, his expression almost childishly excited. Between mouthfuls, he talked about the time they had spent together, but Utani redirected the subject. She asked whether he had considered Hatsushiro's other needs beyond entertainment, including toiletries and ordinary necessities. Her sharp point surprised him. Yuki started defending himself before hesitating. Utani reminded him that genuine care involved more than obvious gestures, leaving uncertainty written across his face. After bathing, Hatsushiro appeared relaxed and satisfied. Her simple way of living gave no obvious sign of dissatisfaction. Yuki nevertheless questioned whether he was capable of noticing those kinds of needs. Later he asked Utani what she thought. Her direct response left him stunned because the comparison she used was much more extreme than he expected. Utani admitted she was not especially close with other girls her age, but even she found Hatsushiro's complete acceptance strange. Elsewhere, Hatsushiro quietly looked over her small selection of clothes and smiled despite having so little. Yuki listened while Utani described a skincare product popular among girls. He barely knew what it was, suddenly aware of just how much he did not understand. She snapped the container shut and casually explained that girls their age discuss such things all the time. Yuki gave a slow, thoughtful nod. There were obviously many details he had never considered. Yuki sank over his desk while thinking about the idea of having a friend around his own age. His life had stayed so busy that he had never paused to realize how much he had missed. Standing beside the desk, Otani calmly suggested that he define what Hatsushiro actually was to him. The blunt reminder hit hard enough to leave Yuki silent for a moment. She casually announced that she would go home and continue playing games, apparently unaffected by the entire discussion. Yuki called her name before she left, sounding hesitant but determined. He caught up and asked her for a kind of help only someone he trusted could give. With new resolve, he walked alongside her and matched her pace. Utani named her price immediately, 6 months of lunches. Yuki protested and tried to bargain the amount down. Completely unimpressed, Utani saw through his desperation at once. She cheerfully winked back at him and left one final teasing comment. Raising 2 fingers in farewell, she walked away while Yuki watched silently. That evening, Yuki sat next to Hatsushiro and explained that he wanted to invite a friend over. Her brief answer sounded emotionless, but something hidden seemed to remain underneath it. Curious, Hatsushiro asked who would be coming. Yuki described Otani as reliable and easy to speak with, lightly minimizing her less pleasant traits. Hatsushiro stayed quiet with her eyes lowered. Confusion slowly appeared when she turned away. Her subdued response did not resemble her normal calm behavior. Yuki finally realized that she might be pouting, perhaps because she was jealous. Her cheeks puffed slightly as she muttered under her breath. The rude little comment escaped before she noticed. Yuki quickly covered his mouth, struggling not to laugh at her embarrassment. Even with his effort, laughter slipped out. Her reaction had taken him by surprise, and he now had trouble hiding the grin spreading across his face. Sitting beside her once more, Yuki apologized and admitted that seeing her jealous had actually made him somewhat happy. Hatsushiro turned toward him, stunned by such open honesty. She suddenly jabbed his side without warning. His startled yelp filled the room as he twisted away in panic. Grinning, Hatsushiro continued the playful attack. Tickling became her chosen revenge, an easy way to get even with him. Yuki squirmed and laughed helplessly as she refused to stop. One final jab knocked him backward onto the futon. Hatsushiro blinked in surprise while Yuki openly declared how happy he was. To him she had never appeared more adorable. Utani nervously arrived at the apartment while holding a small gift bag. Her pulse quickened as she stared at the door ahead. Uncertainty showed on her face, and a shaky whisper escaped her mouth. When the entrance opened, Utani suddenly froze. 2 familiar people greeted her, Yuki and a girl she had never expected to see there. Confusion washed over her while disbelief tightened her chest. Yuki looked just as startled and did not know what to say. His thoughts raced when he noticed the shock in Utani's eyes. She quickly connected everything and realized the girl standing there was Yuki's girlfriend, Hatsushiro from her own school. Realization suddenly hit Utani. Hatsushiro stood before her with a calm, graceful presence, and her beauty was impossible to overlook. Hatsushiro broke the silence with a polite greeting. Utani collected herself and managed a small, nervous smile. Their first meeting was awkward, but an unspoken mixture of curiosity, tension, and unexpected interest lingered between them. Utani sincerely held out her hand, wearing a faint but hopeful smile. Hatsushiro paused briefly and looked toward Yuki, who answered with an encouraging nod. Her uncertainty remained for another second before she slowly reached out. Their hands came together in a soft handshake. Hatsushiro smiled gently as she accepted Utani's offer of friendship. Relief immediately appeared on Utani's face, easing the tension from their awkward introduction. While the 2 girls continued getting acquainted, Yuki stood nearby rather awkwardly and tried to hide his mixed feelings. Hatsushiro noticed his expression and casually asked what was wrong. He dismissed it with a forced smile, muttering about how fast girls could become friends. Hatsushiro noticed that reaction at once. She moved closer and playfully suggested that he might be jealous of their new friendship. Caught off guard, Yuki struggled to find an answer. Utani sighed from the background as she silently endured the couple's overly sweet exchange. Hatsushiro laughed softly, admitting that it probably did look a little overwhelming. Hatsushiro politely served tea, earning several compliments from Utani. Yuki then started proudly listing all the things he loved about Hatsushiro, unable to keep himself from boasting. The room filled with laughter while Utani muttered under her breath about the unbearably sweet atmosphere. Hatsushiro moved toward Yuki and softly called his name, leaving him blushing and visibly embarrassed beneath her gaze. A bag of snacks suddenly appeared and interrupted the romantic mood. Utani immediately opened the treats, earning a playful scolding from Yuki. Even with their teasing, the shared snacks unexpectedly helped everyone relax. Hatsushiro looked at the chips with interest and wondered what they tasted like. Utani casually asked whether she had never eaten them before. Quiet surprise appeared on Hatsushiro's face. After a hesitant nod, Hatsushiro finally accepted one. She faintly remembered eating similar snacks as a child and explained how long ago that had been. The atmosphere gradually became warmer and more casual. A single bite was enough to surprise her. Hatsushiro's eyes widened while she covered her mouth, clearly delighted by the flavor. Everyone was amused by how sincerely she enjoyed something as ordinary as a potato chip. Yuki returned after being away for a short while and tiredly explained why he had taken so long. His conversation in the hallway had lasted longer than expected, leaving him briefly disconnected from what had happened inside. The moment he came back, Yuki stopped. Utani and Hatsushiro were comfortably chatting over tea and snacks. Their cheerful conversation surprised him because he never imagined they would become close so quickly. Their relaxed conversation continued while Yuki remained nearby. Utani and Hatsushiro looked completely comfortable with each other. When Yuki made a remark, both simply turned toward him and smiled. Yuki was stunned when Utani casually patted Hatsushiro's head. The gesture looked almost too familiar. Feeling confused and slightly jealous, he accidentally said exactly what he was thinking. Easy laughter filled the space around their table. Utani gently patted Hatsushiro's hair, something that once would have been impossible. Watching quietly, Yuki realized just how much Hatsushiro had begun opening herself to others. The two girls exchanged easy smiles. One shared glance was enough to confirm that inviting Utani had been the right decision. Whatever awkwardness remained between them had completely disappeared. As the afternoon continued, Utani suggested going somewhere together. Hatsushiro blinked in surprise at the sudden proposal. Yuki looked up from his seat, wondering where Utani planned to take them. Utani decided on the shopping mall nearby. Hatsushiro's eyes widened when she heard the trip was mainly for her. The thought of buying things for herself made her visibly uncertain, and her hands fidgeted nervously. Her surprise increased when Yuki admitted that he wanted to see her wearing something different. His clumsy confession was followed by nervous laughter, while Utani smoothly kept the discussion going. Hatsushiro lowered her eyes, cheeks red with both embarrassment and curiosity. The plan was quickly settled. Utani cheerfully announced that they should leave, walking with obvious purpose. Hatsushiro hesitated at first, but a smile slowly appeared as she agreed, showing a growing trace of excitement. They stopped near the entrance while Utani searched for places to eat. Yuki leaned toward her phone and quietly mentioned pizza. Behind them, Hatsushiro went unusually still as tension began creeping into her posture. Her hands started trembling. Uneasiness settled heavily across her face. Yuki noticed the change from across the room, and his relaxed expression immediately shifted into concern. Hatsushiro tried to appear composed but could not hide it. She forced a smile, lifted both hands, and insisted she was all right. Her body nevertheless swayed slightly, and Yuki softly called her name, uncertain whether she even heard him. He moved closer immediately and rested both hands on her shoulders. His voice became firm as he promised he would stay with her no matter what she was facing. Hearing that, Hatsushiro finally stopped trying to retreat. She slowly nodded and agreed to sit down. Her voice was barely audible, though still steady enough to answer. Yuki gave her a reassuring smile and gently guided her toward the step. The three of them sat together in the entryway. Hatsushiro hugged her knees while slowly finding the words to explain herself. Utani listened carefully, her expression changing from surprise into concern. Hatsushiro had not gone outside once since arriving there. The realization weighed heavily on everyone. She lowered her head and quietly apologized, while Utani looked thoughtful rather than angry. Her avoidance was not caused by dislike or laziness. Whenever Hatsushiro imagined leaving the apartment, all strength seemed to disappear from her body. Fear swallowed every attempt to motivate herself, and guilt filled her apology. Instead of forcing the issue, Utani suggested changing the plan. They could visit the mall another day. Staying home for now was perfectly acceptable, and Yuki agreed with a small nod. Hatsushiro stared at them, surrounded by understanding rather than pressure. Resolve gradually returned to Hatsushiro's face. Sitting upright, she quietly insisted that she still wanted to go. She no longer wanted to rely on everyone around her for everything. Yuki's gaze became noticeably gentler. He leaned slightly closer and gently reminded her that she did not need to force herself. His worry came from genuine concern rather than any lack of faith in her. Instead of withdrawing, Hatsushiro answered with a faint smile. Quiet determination grew as she admitted that she wanted the person who had supported her to see her dressed nicely. Her earlier hesitation finally disappeared. Hatsushiro reached out and lightly touched his fingers. Their hands connected in silent agreement, and they stood together while Utani watched from beside them. They moved toward the exit as a group. Hatsushiro's grip tightened, but she kept walking. Yuki and Utani stayed beside her, calm and steady. Every step forward was small, yet each one mattered. One uncertain foot crossed the doorway. Hatsushiro squeezed Utani's hand for stability as she stepped outside. Bright daylight surrounded them while Yuki gently supported her from behind. Her nervous gaze moved across the unfamiliar surroundings. She briefly stopped, only to feel reassuring arms around her. Yuki remained close without saying much, and that steady warmth gave her enough courage to continue. Soon afterward, Utani suddenly hugged Hatsushiro from behind. She held her tightly, openly proud of what Hatsushiro had managed to do. The emotion in Utani's eyes made it clear how important that small achievement was. Relief and happiness spread through the group. Hatsushiro smiled quietly while Yuki praised the effort she had made. Support surrounded her from both sides, and for once she no longer felt as though she had to struggle alone. Tears glimmered in Hatsushiro's eyes when she looked at Yuki. Her voice shook, but she finally expressed the emotions she had kept hidden. With his hand holding hers, taking the next step no longer seemed quite as frightening. Yuki entered the crowded shopping mall and was surprised by how busy it was on a weekday. His attention quickly shifted to Hatsushiro, quietly wondering whether the noise and number of people might overwhelm her. As they walked farther inside, Hatsushiro admitted that the unfamiliar environment made her uncomfortable. Yuki agreed, confessing that crowded malls were not really his favorite places either. Yuki knew almost nothing about fashion, Yet curiosity still grew inside him. He wanted to see how Hatsushiro would look in ordinary casual clothes. From a short distance away, he watched her browse with otome, while anxiety and anticipation mixed together. Encouraged by both of them, Hatsushiro finally selected something. She pointed toward a dress and decided to trust her instincts instead of thinking too deeply about it. When she emerged from the fitting room in the new dress, both Yuki and Utani stared in surprise. Yuki immediately jumped to his feet and declared that he wanted to buy the entire outfit before anyone could object. Inside the clothing shop, Yuki suggested trying an outfit that looked less like Hatsushiro's school uniform. Utani agreed, pointing out that her first choice was still too similar to what she normally wore. Utani then turned toward Yuki and suggested that he choose the next outfit himself. Startled, he pointed at his own chest in disbelief. Deciding what Hatsushiro should wear made him nervous, but it also gave him a strange determination. After thinking briefly, Yuki accepted the challenge. Hatsushiro softly nodded after seeing Utani's encouraging smile. The mood became lighter while Yuki suddenly felt responsible for making the right choice. He studied the clothes carefully, comparing different colors, fabrics, and styles. Hatsushiro quietly watched, surprised by how seriously he took the task. Yuki kept imagining which combination would best suit her natural warmth. Several minutes passed without a decision. Every outfit looked good to him. His frustration increased until Otani sighed, realizing they would never finish if he continued analyzing every possibility. Seeing him struggle, Utani volunteered to choose the dress herself. Hatsushiro paused uncertainly but eventually agreed, trusting the confidence and enthusiasm in her friend's smile. Utani immediately pushed Yuki away from the fitting area before he could argue further. She promised that the result would surprise him and quickly took control, directing him toward the waiting seats. Once Yuki stepped aside, he was firmly told not to peek until they were finished. The two girls disappeared among the clothing racks while he remained behind, confused and a little anxious. The waiting felt unusually slow. Sitting alone on a bench, Yuki discovered just how long choosing clothes could take. Even a math book could not stop boredom from creeping in. Finally, Otani came back wearing a victorious expression. She teased him about how much work it had taken, then proudly hinted that she had created a masterpiece. Yuki became increasingly eager to see Hatsushiro. Otani reminded Hatsushiro that the entire purpose was to show the outfit to Yuki. Still embarrassed by the attention, Hatsushiro hesitated before eventually agreeing to come out. She approached Yuki with careful, nervous steps. Standing in front of him, Hatsushiro struggled to ask what he thought of her appearance. Yuki was already leaning forward, visibly waiting for the reveal. Hatsushiro wore a casual combination completely different from her normal uniform, and avoided looking directly at him. Her cardigan, blouse, and cap matched softly as an outfit. Her movements showed equal parts nervousness and quiet hope. Yuki remained speechless for only a second before bursting into obvious excitement. Compliments came one after another as he told her how adorable she looked. His reaction was loud, but there was no doubt that it was sincere. Relief spread over Hatsushiro's face as she finally relaxed. Her embarrassment slowly changed into gentle warmth. Yuki, meanwhile, became so overwhelmed that he turned aside and covered his face while the crowded mall continued around them. Otani confidently explained why she had chosen those clothes, saying Hatsushiro suited a slightly bolder style better than something plain. Yuki listened with amazement, impressed that such small changes could create such a different impression. While Utani continued explaining the finer details, Yuki barely heard her. His thoughts had already wandered completely into admiration, and every conclusion returned to the same point. Hatsushiro looked unbelievably cute. Hatsushiro blushed deeply and lowered her eyes beneath the constant praise. So many compliments made it difficult for her to stay composed. Even Otani suggested stopping before Hatsushiro became too overwhelmed to stand. Still embarrassed, Hatsushiro smiled and thanked them. Yuki admitted with a laugh that he had probably praised her too much. The two relaxed again as the tension faded. Watching Hatsushiro smile with new confidence, Yuki pressed a hand against his chest. He almost gave in to the urge to hug her. Completely unaware of his struggle, Hatsushiro simply continued smiling toward him. Utani suddenly planted a firm hand on Yuki's shoulder and announced her next objective. With Hatsushiro now dressed so stylishly beside him, she refused to let Yuki remain in his ordinary school uniform. After finishing their drinks, Utani led them back toward the clothing racks. Once again she took command, only this time Yuki became the person she intended to style. Hatsushiro waited nearby with an amused smile. Utani selected several pieces without hesitation and placed them in front of him. Yuki questioned what seemed like a much more random method than his own careful approach. Utani, however, chose everything with complete confidence. Yuki voiced doubts about the fabric and quality, earning only a teasing look from Utani. While he tried to understand the reasoning behind her choices, she remained completely unconcerned. His doubts faded somewhat when Otani pointed out his athletic build. Working part-time and participating in clubs had given him a solid frame. She studied him from top to bottom, jokingly pausing before making a comment about his face. Otani gave her blunt assessment without changing expression. Yuki stared back in disbelief, but the comment remained in his mind. She clearly had an image of how he should look and refused to let him ignore it. After the teasing, Otome handed him several clothes and told him to try them on. Half defeated, Yuki sighed and finally walked toward the fitting room. Inside the booth, Yuki struggled to pull on a pair of tight jeans while Utani kept commenting from the other side. He endured the discomfort, deciding it would be worthwhile if Hatsushiro enjoyed the result. While waiting, Utani's playful expression gradually became thoughtful. Something about Hatsushiro and Yuki's relationship continued bothering her curiosity. She quietly decided that she wanted to understand the girl's situation better. Yuki began speaking sincerely from behind the fitting room curtain. He acknowledged how much emotional weight Hatsushiro seemed to carry. Utani listened with care, wondering how such a close bond could have started on a night of heavy rain. He then explained how everything had truly begun. The image of Hatsushiro standing soaked in the rain was still vivid in his memory. He remembered finding her at the edge, ready to disappear from the world entirely. Yuki had never shared the details of that day with anyone else. Utani listened quietly and processed every part of the story. She understood why he had chosen not to force Hatsushiro to talk before she was ready. Even so, Utami admitted that she had made a different decision. She had no intention of waiting for permission. Her curiosity and concern had grown strong enough that she planned to investigate Hatsushiro's circumstances herself. Utami laughed lightly while admitting that she had grown fond of Hatsushiro. Something about the girl made her personally want to help. Yuki did not object and calmly accepted her decision. Yuki naturally praised Otani in return. Her bold personality and unexpected empathy had not escaped his notice. Otani proudly responded that she was obviously one of the best women anyone could know. Otani came out wearing her changed uniform and quietly stood beneath Yuki's gaze. A confident nod from her showed that the transformation was finished. Yuki looked over her appearance from top to bottom and was briefly speechless. A small shift in his face revealed that he was uncertain how to respond. Before the silence became uncomfortable, he asked whether she was really satisfied with it. His concern became more visible when Otani still did not answer immediately. After making him wait, Otani finally gave her opinion. She admitted that the result looked considerably better than expected. Yuki relaxed in relief and wiped the sweat from his forehead. Just when the situation settled, Otani picked up her bag and prepared to leave. Curious about her destination, Yuki questioned her plans. She explained that she had a class to attend and vaguely dismissed his remark about staying up late working on manga. Before heading off, Utani gave Yuki one final suggestion. He should show Hatsushiro his new outfit, then spend some time walking around with her before they returned home. Yuki thanked her cheerfully for the thoughtful advice. Only afterward did he understand what Utani was really doing. She was intentionally leaving the two of them alone. He watched Utani leave and quietly appreciated her consideration. Following her suggestion, Yuki decided he would explore the area together with Hatsushiro for a while. While collecting one of their purchases, a sudden realization stopped him mid-step. This outing was no longer simply a shopping trip. The afternoon had begun to carry a completely different meaning. That truth became obvious when he met Hatsushiro again. They walked closely together through the mall, surrounded by a warm but unfamiliar feeling. What started as an ordinary errand had transformed into something more personal. Yuki realized this was their first genuine date. Yuki pictured himself walking beside Hatsushiro and holding her hand, secretly hoping the rest of their afternoon might feel like a real date. City lights shone around them while they moved through the crowd. He followed Hatsushiro into a comfortable cafe and watched her settle at a corner table with a warm drink. Not wanting to interrupt the peaceful scene, Yuki paused outside for a second, his chest filled with anticipation. Yuki approached with an easy smile and greeted her, genuinely happy to be beside her again. Hatsushiro immediately brightened when she saw him, her expression softening as she welcomed him. A sudden silence settled between them when Hatsushiro looked away and uncertainly questioned how she appeared. Confused by that reaction, Yuki leaned closer and tried to explain himself in hopes of easing her doubt. After hesitating, she finally met his eyes and admitted that she had looked away because she thought he seemed incredibly cool. Yuki sat stiffly while Hatsushiro quietly drank from her cup and stole occasional glances at him. Unable to handle the growing tension, he eventually rose from his seat without knowing what else to do. Hoping to restore the mood, Hatsushiro mentioned Otani leaving early and spoke a little more brightly. Yuki answered with a forced smile, pretending to be casual while desperately trying to stay composed inside. The awkwardness became too much, so Yuki quickly excused himself and claimed he needed the restroom. Hatsushiro softly acknowledged him, surprised by how suddenly and nervously he hurried away. Inside the restroom, Yuki splashed cold water over his face and groaned at how badly he had handled the situation. Embarrassment filled him as he replayed everything and cursed his own awkward behavior. Leaning over the sink, he tried to slow his breathing and quiet the regret circling through his thoughts. While Hatsushiro waited alone, two unfamiliar men approached and spoke with an uncomfortable amount of familiarity. Yuka returned from across the room just as one of them leaned over her table and immediately noticed something was wrong. Hatsushiro avoided looking at them and stayed quiet while the men continued talking, apparently unconcerned by her discomfort. One eventually reached toward her shoulder, pushing the encounter beyond ordinary annoyance. Yuka in Simhoping. Yuki stepped between them immediately and firmly caught the man's wrist, speaking in a calm but unwavering tone. His sudden intervention changed the atmosphere at once, and Hatsushiro looked toward him with obvious relief. The man recoiled in surprise when Yuki tightened his grip and refused to tolerate any more disrespect. Yuki's reaction had been immediate and instinctive, driven by a quiet determination to protect Hatsushiro. As the tension increased, a nearby person recognized Yuki and called out, briefly interrupting the standoff. Yuki still refused to release his position, ignoring complaints while his actions made his intentions perfectly clear. Fuji casually entered the cafe and approached the group, his tall frame instantly drawing attention. The two men took one look at him and instinctively became far less aggressive. Without even raising his voice, Fuji calmly told everyone to settle down and wait while he took control of the situation. Instead of confronting them head-on, Fuji invited the girls to eat lunch with him and his friends. His natural charm worked immediately, and they reacted with visible excitement. The atmosphere changed completely when the two embarrassed men handed Yuki money and apologized for their behavior. Fuji then guided everyone away, leaving behind relief, laughter, and a little admiration. Still recovering from the incident, Hatsushiro quietly thanked them with relief coloring her cheeks. Yuki gently checked whether she was all right, and she finally managed another small smile. Fuji modestly rejected the praise and insisted he had done nothing special, even though Hatsushiro and the others continued thanking him sincerely. Wearing his usual smile, Fuji minimized what he had done and shifted the attention away from himself. He even joked about the convenient timing, acting as though the whole problem had resolved itself naturally. During the lighter conversation, Fuji suddenly leaned closer and asked a question that surprised everyone. Hatsushiro blushed and shyly admitted that she really was Yuki's girlfriend. Yuki immediately supported her answer and proudly confirmed it despite his embarrassment. Fuji used the opportunity to tease Hatsushiro, complimenting her and saying she was even cuter than expected. Pushing the joke further, Fuji asked whether she would rather date him instead. Both Hatsushiro and Yuki reacted in stunned confusion, with her unable to answer while Yuki hurriedly protested. Hatsushiro answered sincerely from the heart, describing Yuki as a wonderful boyfriend and confessing that she sometimes felt she did not deserve him. The unexpected praise left his eyes wide with surprise. Heat rushed across Yuki's face as the meaning of her words sank in. Hatsushiro noticed immediately and leaned closer in curiosity, surprised by just how red he had become. Fuji suddenly laughed and revealed that he had only been joking, quickly brushing the awkward moment aside. After excusing himself, Fuji waved and returned to his own table while leaving a few final words behind. Before going, he complimented Hatsushiro once more and called her a lovely person with a knowing smile. Once the tension disappeared, Hatsushiro and Yuki talked more comfortably about how skillfully Fuji had handled everything. Sitting together and smiling, they agreed that despite all his teasing, Fuji was genuinely a good person. Hatsushiro then quietly confessed that she had felt a little jealous. More than anything, she wished she could see Yuki while he was at school, and the warmth in her eyes made her affection obvious. Caught by surprise, Yuki struggled to answer and instead suggested taking a walk nearby. Hatsushiro's widened eyes showed she understood that he might actually be asking her on a proper date. Their hands touched as she rose from the table, and she only hesitated briefly before agreeing. Yuki quietly wondered whether she had been waiting all along for him to finally make the first move. Just as they started moving, Hatsushiro's legs suddenly weakened, and she collapsed. Alarm immediately crossed Yuki's face as he knelt beside her, worried but careful not to frighten her further. Yuki quickly realized that everything from earlier must have exhausted her. Still shaken from the incident, Hatsushiro tried to reassure him with a weak but gentle smile. Smiling softly, Hatsushiro admitted that she honestly wanted to go on a real date with Yuki. Even while relying on him for support and trembling slightly, she spoke with genuine determination. Seeing that she was forcing a smile only to stop him from worrying, Yuki gently suggested ending the outing and returning home. He reminded her that continuing made no sense if she could not truly enjoy herself. The words affected Hatsushiro more than he expected, and her quiet nod carried obvious relief. Before they moved, Yuki asked whether she would hold his hand while they walked home. Hatsushiro hesitated, then reached back toward him and silently agreed to move at her own pace beside him. His kindness overwhelmed her. Hatsushiro thanked him through tears with a voice that nearly broke, admitting she was grateful to have someone who never forced her beyond what she could manage. Yuki softly asked whether she could walk, and Hatsushiro answered with a determined smile. Their fingers intertwined before they slowly started toward home together. A sudden squeeze from her hand surprised Yuki and made his heart jump. Hatsushiro giggled softly and looked aside while the two continued walking together along the quiet road. Their playful exchange of hand squeezes continued the entire way home, neither one willing to stop first. Each gentle press communicated more affection than either of them could easily say aloud. Utani raised the issue with visible irritation, demanding to know why Yuki and Hatsushiro had stopped wearing the outfits she chose for them. Her disappointment remained even as both casually avoided the subject and left for lunch. Afterward, Yuki softly revealed the actual reason. Both he and Hatsushiro felt strangely uncomfortable in those clothes and could not shake the feeling. They appreciated Utani's effort but decided to reserve the outfits for genuinely special occasions. That explanation surprised Utani. She never imagined the clothes would become so meaningful. Hearing them call the outfits something for special occasions left her wondering how such an ordinary gift had gained so much emotional weight. Utani sat quietly while processing the answer. Classmates around her laughed softly, and Yuki noticed her discomfort but could not think of anything useful to add. Suddenly Fuji burst into the room with theatrical energy and shouted affectionately toward Utani. She answered immediately by punching him. Even after being hit, Fuji sat up smiling through a bloody nose and claimed he felt wonderful. Utani showed no sympathy, while Yuki checked on him and their classmates worried about the damage to his supposedly handsome face. Yuki sighed while reflecting on the strange classroom dynamic. Utani preferred keeping to herself, while Fuji seemed determined to invite trouble. Their classmates clearly understood neither of them very well. Fuji then acted as though nothing had happened and suddenly remembered a message for Yuki. The principal wanted to meet him after school, leaving Yuki visibly confused about the reason. Later that afternoon, Yuki walked through the hallway while quietly wondering why he had been summoned. Inside the office, the principal handed him a document and offered a few brief words of praise. Their meetings were usually this formal and short. Because of Yuki's scholarship, staff members generally encouraged rather than scolded him. The principal welcomed Yuki kindly and apologized for calling him away during class. His warm, casual manner immediately reduced whatever tension Yuki might have felt. Yuki politely responded and waited near the door for an explanation. He calmly asked whether the principal had called him there for something specific. Instead of answering directly, the principal explained that another person would describe the matter. The conversation shifted, and Yuki prepared to meet whoever was waiting for him. To Yuki's surprise, Fuji was already inside and waved casually from his seat. Another man introduced himself as Yusuke Yuki and greeted him in a friendly manner. Yuki stared in confusion, still unable to guess what the meeting concerned. Then the man beside them stepped forward. Koji Shimizu, recently appointed as the baseball coach, offered his hand. He praised Yuki's athletic potential and expressed confidence despite the long gap since Yuki last played baseball seriously. Coach Shimizu enthusiastically announced that Yuki was the perfect candidate to become the team's ace. The intense praise only confused Yuki, who had no idea how to answer such overwhelming enthusiasm. Trying to encourage him, Shimizu described how an injury had once sidelined him during high school. He insisted that ability could return even after a long break. His passionate speech came so quickly that Yuki could barely respond. The coach's intense energy left Yuki increasingly confused. Something about Shimizu's intensity felt strangely familiar, though he could not immediately remember why. Once the emotional speech slowed, Yuki cautiously asked whether they had met before. Shimizu laughed and admitted that he expected Yuki to recognize him, though Yuki still remained uncertain. Fujial calmly stepped in and reminded the coach that Yuki had been away from baseball for years. Shimizu finally eased his enthusiasm and acknowledged that he had overlooked how long the gap really was. Then realization suddenly struck Yuki. Shimizu was not merely a coach but a former professional player Yuki had once admired. The name immediately carried a completely different weight. Yusuke confirmed Yuki's memory. Shimizu had once been a celebrated pitcher with numerous achievements, but a serious injury forced him to retire nearly 10 years earlier. Still trying to understand the situation, Yuki asked them to explain clearly. Shimizu, however, remained focused on one goal: convincing Yuki to become the school team's new ace pitcher. When Shimizu's enthusiasm started rising again, the principal calmly intervened. He gently restrained the coach and remarked that reasoning with Shimizu became nearly impossible once baseball excited him. The principal then summarized Shimizu's real intention for Yuki. Although still flustered, Yuki politely acknowledged the explanation while confusion continued lingering in his thoughts. Shimizu formally invited Yuki to join. He referred to Yuki's baseball experience in middle school and expressed sincere hope that the boy would dedicate himself to the sport again. However, the principal voiced several practical reservations. Joining the team might benefit the school, but combining serious club activity with scholarship-level academics would be difficult. He suggested treating the conversation casually for now instead of forcing an immediate answer. Yuki respectfully bowed and declined. He appreciated their interest but refused to risk his academic position. Shimizu clearly looked disappointed, yet Yuki remained polite and firm. After Yuki closed the door behind him, Shimizu grabbed his head in frustration. Yusuke reminded him that overwhelming someone like Yuki with pressure was exactly the wrong approach. Outside the office, Yuki walked past students continuing their normal routines. Someone called his name from a distance, but he barely reacted because his thoughts were still tangled around the meeting. Fuji caught up with a relaxed smile and suggested walking home together. Yuki agreed immediately and matched his pace as they left the school grounds. During the walk, they exchanged updates about their schedules. Fuji explained that changes in the director's work now allowed him to leave earlier. Their conversation reminded them of the days when they used to head home after studying together. The mood shifted when Fuji mentioned the person waiting at Yuki's home. He spoke warmly about Hatsushiro greeting him every day. Hearing it described that way made Yuki realize how domestic the arrangement sounded. Yuki laughed loudly and immediately denied that it resembled marriage. Fuji chuckled at his reaction and remarked that Yuki still had the same habit of talking to himself. Before they separated, Fuji's expression became more sincere. He quietly apologized for how things had gone earlier, surprising Yuki but also earning his appreciation. As they continued walking, Fuji admitted some of his private insecurities. He admired Shimizu's ability to recover from setbacks but believed he lacked that kind of strength. Even so, Fuji accepted his limitations without bitterness. Yuki eventually mentioned Hatsushiro and thanked Fuji again for helping her. Fuji smiled and dismissed the praise, saying that protecting someone important to a friend was simply natural. Yuki suddenly found himself admiring Fuji. In his mind, Fuji was cheerful, handsome, and naturally bright in a way that made Yuki oddly self-conscious about himself. Their walk ended outside a supermarket. Yuki tried to thank him more formally, but Fuji quickly moved the conversation along and urged him inside. Everyday routine resumed once they entered the store. Looking across the shelves, Yuki suggested buying some ice cream. Fuji studied one cup but seemed distracted by something else. A subtle change crossed his face as uncertainty surfaced. The mention of Hatsushiro immediately drew a passionate reaction from Yuki. Fuji pointed out how jealous Yuki had acted earlier, and their light teasing gradually softened the mood between them. Fuji casually commented that Yuki and Hatsushiro made a good pair. Slightly embarrassed, Yuki suddenly offered to buy Fuji ice cream as thanks. The abrupt change surprised Fuji, but he smiled and accepted it. While choosing flavors, Fuji suddenly directed Yuki's attention across the supermarket. Both men turned in the same direction, curious about what he had noticed. Hatsushiro was standing near the produce section, neither expected to encounter her there, and Yuki froze in surprise at seeing her alone in the store. At the supermarket, Hatsushiro spotted Yuki entering alongside Fuji. Calmly placing groceries into her basket, she greeted them with her usual quiet poise. Concern immediately appeared on Yuki's face as he asked whether she was truly comfortable shopping alone. Hatsushiro gently reassured both of them, showing that she was determined to try handling the errand by herself. Smiling cheerfully, she explained that choosing the ingredients alone would keep dinner a surprise. Yuki listened with obvious interest, secretly delighted by the idea of discovering what meal awaited him later. Remembering the first time he tasted her cooking brought a warm memory back. Hatsushiro watched him affectionately and recalled how unexpectedly happy his enjoyment had made her. She leaned forward with a bright expression. Hoping to recreate that feeling, Hatsushiro asked him to look forward to dinner again. Slightly embarrassed, Yuki quietly nodded in reply. A brief silence formed as they moved a little closer. Hatsushiro tilted her head curiously while Yuki struggled to process the warmth of her attention. Then she gently reached upward and patted his head. Embarrassed, Yuki tried to answer but only stammered. Hatsushiro laughed softly and admitted she had acted without thinking because his reaction seemed too adorable to resist. Fuji, who had been quietly observing the two, finally interrupted with a teasing reminder that he was still there. Everyone laughed before Hatsushiro and Yuki continued shopping, briefly lost in their own little world again. Passing the egg display, Yuki offered to carry Hatsushiro's basket. She thanked him, and the three slipped naturally into a casual discussion about sales, ingredients, and what they still needed. When Yuki recommends grabbing soy sauce, Hatsushiro agrees right away. Fuji, meanwhile, stays unusually quiet, clearly thinking about something that makes both of them glance at him curiously. Fuji's curiosity grows as he asks why Yuki knows so much about Hatsushiro's kitchen. Watching how close they are, He comments that they seem more like a married couple than ordinary classmates. Taken by surprise, Yuki gives a vague answer about visiting often. Though he smiles, hesitation slips into his thoughts. He avoids mentioning that they live together, uncertain how Fuji might take it. Fuji lightly recommends visiting a nearby family restaurant. Hatsushiro's eyes brighten with interest, and she agrees, adding that she also wants to thank him for helping earlier. At their booth, menus are opened while everyone starts deciding. One of them chooses quickly, but Hatsushiro takes longer, carefully looking through the available dishes. Without thinking too much, she eventually points to a simple meal. Yuki glances over with mild surprise. A gentle smile appears on her face as she quietly confirms that choice. Even after learning the dish was from the children's menu, Hatsushiro calmly said it was sufficient. Other suggestions failed to change her mind. She remained firmly settled on it. Once everyone had chosen, Fuji called the waitress over and placed their orders. As the menus were collected, Yuki quietly watched the smooth interaction with complicated feelings. Soon afterward, Yuki remarked on how naturally Fuji managed the exchange. His effortless presence even caused the waitress to blush, something Yuki noticed with faint disbelief. A light-hearted dispute quickly developed. Clearly annoyed by Fuji's modest attitude, Yuki insisted that he was genuinely capable. Fuji simply dismissed the praise as exaggeration, saying there was nothing remarkable about him. After the mood settled, Hatsushiro leaned forward appreciatively. She sincerely thanked Fuji for intervening earlier, and praised how smoothly he had resolved the situation without creating more tension. Fuji calmly spoke to the group, jokingly describing himself as the benefactor of Yuki's girlfriend. Hatsushiro looked surprised, the unusual word lingering awkwardly in her thoughts. The mood changed when Yuki admitted there was something he wanted to ask. Before he could continue, Hatsushiro shyly raised her hand and interrupted with a request of her own. Looking steadily ahead, Hatsushiro said she wanted to know more about Yuki. Blushing, she openly admitted how much she admired him. Her declaration surprised everyone, especially Yuki, who sat stunned as his name hung in the air. Leaning back, Fuji began describing the first time he met Yuki at a middle school tournament. Despite being younger, Yuki had already distinguished himself. His ability left a strong impression that later influenced Fuji's perspective. Although Fuji had enjoyed success early on, he felt disconnected from his achievements. Life seemed empty until Yuki appeared. Their meeting awakened something dormant, forcing Fuji to reconsider purpose and admiration in ways he had never understood. Fuji remembered first noticing Yuki during a regional tournament match. Back then, Yuki had barely been on their radar. Even though he had not appeared during the first year, his arrival on the field was unforgettable. Hoping to improve his personal record, Fuji had casually joined the team as a helper. Surprised by that motivation, Hatsushiro questioned his idea of adding a little color to his resume through such a choice. As Yuki devoted himself completely to baseball, Fuji laughed while recalling how the game played out. Hatsushiro leaned closer, shocked to hear that Yuki had barely studied until his second year because of his dedication. As soon as Yuki took the mound, uneasiness spread through Fuji. He understood the likely result immediately. Their team had virtually no chance, and Fuji could not even make contact with the ball. Yuki seemed almost unreal on the field. Fuji wondered whether someone with that level of skill could truly still be a middle school student. No matter how hard they tried, the result never changed. Yuki played like an experienced athlete and overwhelmed everyone. His pitching impressed them, but his batting was equally dominant, with several runs already scored. Sometime later, Fuji encountered Yuki again at a neighborhood park. He watched Yuki practice intensely while his father shouted instructions and corrections from nearby. Despite nearly perfect performance in their earlier game, Yuki continued training relentlessly. Every throw carried focus and power, while his father criticized even small errors. Compared with that practice, their tournament match almost seemed like a warm-up. Fuji approached to hand back a ball that rolled nearby. After praising Yuki's skill, he received a cheerful reply and an easygoing apology in return. To Fuji's surprise, Yuki did not recognize him immediately. Later, however, Yuki offered useful pitching advice, proving that he had remembered their previous encounter after all. Fuji rejected the idea that Yuki was his benefactor, although everyone could see how much that baseball match had inspired him. Wanting details, Hatsushiro questioned what Yuki had done for him. Taking a sip of his drink, Fuji admitted he was not as exceptional as others believed. Before meeting Yuki, constant praise had convinced him that he was naturally talented, shaping the way he viewed himself. It had been easy to live like the hero of his own story while surrounded by admiration. Hatsushiro disagreed with that harsh self-judgment, gently noting that Yuki now surpassed him first in athletics and later in academics. Fuji accepted that reality without resentment. He had no desire to surpass Yuki and preferred enjoying life within his own boundaries. Remaining inside his comfort zone gave him a sense of peace. Smiling with satisfaction, Fuji praised the meal and offered his thanks. Because of her presence, his everyday life had begun to feel brighter. Fuji ended his story with a confident grin, once again explaining why he viewed Yuki as his benefactor. Hatsushiro listened with quiet admiration while Yuki remained surprised by the unexpected title. Still curious, Hatsushiro asked why Fuji continued giving his all to baseball while claiming to dislike it. He paused between bites, then admitted that he hated the sport before dismissing the reason as something unimportant. Later that evening, Yuki studied beneath a single desk lamp at home. Elsewhere nearby, Hatsushiro silently finished drying her hair. Suddenly, a loud shout broke the silence as his name seemed to echo across the apartment. The memory of Yuki's father rang out with harsh training orders, forcing strict lessons into muscle memory. Criticism filled his thoughts as he remembered repeated mistakes and constant warnings about losing concentration. With his father's words trapped in his mind, Yuki pressed his hands against his temples in frustration. He tried returning to his work, but the repeated command to concentrate continued overwhelming him. After finally finishing his studies, Yuki leaned back in relief. Hatsushiro brought him a warm cup of tea and softly praised his effort. He accepted it with a quiet thank you, grateful for her calming presence. They settled together on the floor in comfortable silence. Yuki slowly drank while Hatsushiro sat beside him. Their hands eventually brushed, and without saying anything she allowed the contact to remain. Looking at his hand, Hatsushiro noticed the rough skin left from years of baseball. She rested her head against his shoulder and smiled. The shape of his palm quietly reflected years of effort and discipline. Yuki became embarrassed as she continued examining his hand, his cheeks heating up. He explained that training had hardened the skin, though most of it had returned to normal. Hatsushiro responded with a soft, teasing laugh. She listened while he praised her hands in return. Hers also carried signs of constant care, from washing dishes, preparing meals, and helping him every day. Yuki then gently held both her hands and thanked her sincerely. Hatsushiro's eyes gradually filled with tears. Overcome with emotion, she leaned against his chest, letting quiet affection and trembling relief express what neither needed to say aloud. Hatsushiro raised the subject of baseball, curiosity showing in her eyes as she asked Yuki why he had stopped playing. He fell silent, surprised by the direct question. She gently continued, remembering how seriously he once devoted himself to the sport. Faced with his silence, Hatsushiro nervously twisted a strand of hair around her finger. It was a habit that appeared whenever words became difficult. Beneath that small movement was a mixture of concern and uncertainty. Yuki answered warmly and reached toward her without hesitation. That small act briefly stopped her movements. Her attention, once fixed on his past, shifted toward her own feelings. She admitted she had become distracted, lowering a barrier she had not realized existed. Yuki's comment left her flustered. With red cheeks, Hatsushiro answered brightly and admitted that she had actually been watching him closely the entire time. With gentle resolve, she encouraged him to talk openly. Perhaps sharing everything would finally allow some of those old wounds to heal. Yuki began revealing part of his past in a calm but distant voice. Speaking about his father, he remembered the man's strict methods and deep admiration for legendary baseball players. Memories returned of exhausting training beneath the blazing sun, dragging tires and swinging until his body gave out. His father's methods were severe and built around relentless discipline. They were not intentionally cruel, but allowed no weakness or complaints, shaping Yuki through constant endurance. He recalled himself as a younger boy, soaked in sweat and always pushed further. Constant pressure made him feel strong yet also pitied by those around him. To neighbors he looked like a child carrying a parent's dream that was far too heavy. Eventually, frustration broke through Yuki's restraint. In a rare act of rebellion, he shouted back at the very person who had taught him to endure. Still, Yuki never lost his determination. Baseball became his entire life, and he practiced every day without noticing how deeply the pressure was leaving scars. Yuki continued in a distant, composed voice, recalling the period after his father suddenly died. His daily rhythm disappeared and time blurred together. The exact cause mattered less to him than the deep emotional silence left behind. Even surrounded by grief, Yuki could not cry. His mother and younger sister broke down, while he simply watched in numb silence. During the funeral, he stood among mourning relatives completely detached from the sorrow around him. As the night continued, the clock eventually reached midnight. Realizing how long their conversation had lasted, Yuki suggested that both of them should get some sleep. Hatsushiro softly asked whether those memories explained why he abandoned baseball. Yuki avoided answering directly and dismissed the idea with uncertainty, but her question remained in his thoughts. Thinking more deeply, Yuki finally admitted that once his father died, the passion he had once carried for baseball simply disappeared. As he pulled out an old bag, Yuki revealed that he had not touched his baseball equipment since his father passed away. He smiled while speaking, yet the weight remained obvious. Everything had stayed packed away, untouched but never truly forgotten. Without hesitation, Hatsushiro stepped closer and suddenly grabbed his hand, catching him by surprise. Her face turned serious, showing a determination that left little room for doubt. Without waiting for permission, she firmly presented a glove and proposed that they play catch the following day. It sounded less like a casual suggestion and more like an invitation towards something emotionally important. By morning, the two stood facing one another near the riverbank. Yuki put on his glove and slowly became familiar again with the sensation he had once known so well. After catching her throw, Yuki asked why she wanted to play with him. Hatsushiro smiled gently and explained that his story had moved her, making her want to experience it herself. Nervousness ran through Hatsushiro as the ball landed inside her glove. She quickly apologized, worried that she might have made some kind of mistake. Gradually, confidence replaced her hesitation. Watching her posture, Yuki gave advice about how ball rotation affected control. She listened closely to every explanation, eager to make her next throw better. Her ability improved with each catch. The returns grew more accurate, surprising Yuki himself. Most beginners struggled at first, yet she adapted quickly, prompting genuine admiration in his voice as he praised her progress. They slowly widened the distance and tested longer throws. Holding the ball, Yuki quietly noticed how rusty his form had become. Doubt surfaced as he wondered what his father would have said about it. A memory returned, carrying his father's sharp corrections through his mind. Technique had once mattered above everything. Now, facing someone who played only out of kindness, Yuki wondered what baseball actually meant to him anymore. Yuki concentrated carefully while practicing his throwing motion. He repeated familiar points about arm movement, body control and fingertip awareness, passing to Hatsushiro the lessons once drilled relentlessly into him. Remembering his father's strict coaching, he considered how differently techniques suited different people. Some lessons still felt useful, while others no longer matched who he had become. Uneasiness entered his thoughts, but determination soon returned. Despite complaining, he tried the old motion again and copied what he had learned years earlier. It felt unfamiliar, yet his body still remembered. His father's voice echoed through memory, mixing harsh criticism with traces of pride. Then an image of the man laughing appeared, less like a strict coach and more like an ordinary father. Suddenly, Yuki launched the ball with tremendous force. Hatsushiro barely caught it, her glove shaking from the impact. Surprise crossed his face. The moment proved something important. He could still throw with strength, and she had managed to receive it. The force sent Hatsushiro onto the ground, but she quickly laughed instead of complaining. Her hand trembled slightly, although pride remained on her face. Seeing that, Yuki hurried toward her in concern. She reassured him that she was all right. Holding the glove close, Hatsushiro admitted the catch had felt satisfying even though it left her a little shaky. Her light joke quickly softened the tension. Yuki suddenly became quiet as tears formed before he could hold them back. Concerned, Hatsushiro gently asked whether something was bothering him. That throw had brought his father's voice back vividly, sharp and loud enough to be impossible to ignore. Harsh as it was, the sound remained familiar. Beneath it, however, Yuki remembered something gentler. A bright and genuine smile appeared clearly in his memory. That buried happiness returned at once. Yuki finally understood that he had played baseball not because he loved the sport itself, but because he wanted to make his father happy. Walking alongside Hatsushiro, Yuki shared something deeply personal that he would not tell anyone else. His words sounded lighter, almost joking, though his expression remained completely sincere. Hatsushiro immediately encouraged him to continue playing catch. Her playful suggestion hid a growing desire to share the experience with him. Though embarrassed, Yuki could not stop himself from laughing at her enthusiasm. As they continued throwing the ball, Hatsushiro suddenly asked about his studies. The unexpected question pulled Yuki away from his concentration. He paused, staring at the ball in his palm. His answer surfaced naturally. Becoming a doctor was his goal. Years earlier, Yuki's father had collapsed at home. Because they lived in a rural region, medical help arrived too late. The helplessness stayed with him. Studying became more than responsibility. It became a promise to someday save someone when another emergency came. Hatsushiro stood before the doorway with one hand raised in determination. She declared her own goal of becoming a doctor who could serve isolated and underserved communities, a dream shaped by compassion and resolve. Yuki listened with open admiration, a gentle smile appearing as he absorbed her words. Across the path, Hatsushiro smiled brightly, warmed by the encouragement visible in his reaction. Calling to her, Yuki lifted a hand with a grin and suddenly confessed his love. Hatsushiro turned toward him in obvious surprise, completely caught off guard by the unexpected declaration. Her shock caused her to miss the incoming throw, and the ball flew wildly off course. Embarrassed, she quickly apologized while Yuki stood nearby with a flushed face. With a gentle smile, Yuki silently addressed his late father. The boy who once chased a professional baseball career was now enjoying a peaceful game of catch with the girl he loved. Coach Shimizu noticed Yuki entering the reference room and greeted him with his usual energy. Folding his arms with a broad grin, he asked whether Yuki had finally chosen to join the baseball team. Yuki refused calmly, repeating the same answer without wavering. Shimizu merely laughed, confidently imagining a powerful team built around Yuki and Fuji, insisting that reaching Koshien could become realistic with both of them aboard. Yuki remained doubtful and rejected the idea. He did not believe success could come that easily. He also pointed out that Fuji seemed to lack the passion necessary to seriously pursue such a dream. Shimizu reacted with passionate disbelief, insisting Fuji truly wanted to reach Koshien. Yuki, however, had seen the opposite. Fuji often avoided practice and appeared completely uninterested in the effort required. With a polite bow, Yuki excused himself despite the coach's emotional objections. Nearly in tears, Shimizu shouted about Koshien's greatness. Watching Yuki leave, he complained about how stubborn someone with so much potential could be. Yuki again rejected the invitation firmly, explaining that joining the baseball club was not part of his plans. As he opened the door, he added that work and studying already filled his schedule. Shimizu hurried after him and continued trying to negotiate. Growing irritated, Yuki asked why the coach never listened. Without turning around, he told Shimizu not to summon him after school again, especially right now. Walking through the hall, Yuki reminded himself of his priorities. With renewed concentration, he resolved to remain on track for the major event coming later that summer. Back at home, Yuki explained that he would be staying later at school to study. Hatsushiro guessed he was preparing for final exams, and although her expression remained calm, concern could be heard in her voice. Yuki apologized, but Hatsushiro gave him a warm smile and encouraged him to keep pursuing his goals. Although she spoke understandingly, he still felt that spending time with her mattered more than anything else. Hatsushiro gently rested against Yuki's arm and asked for one small favor in exchange for supporting him, just a little time together before he left. She encouraged him kindly, telling him not to worry about her while concentrating on his studies. Smiling gently, she promised that regardless of how late he came home, a warm dinner would still be waiting. They remained seated together in silence, their heads resting close. What started as a short moment before bedtime had become a familiar routine whenever Yuki was home. Since Hatsushiro moved in, those peaceful evenings had become his greatest comfort. Still, balancing both priorities proved difficult. Yuki admitted he could barely focus at home because her presence distracted him. Finals had never seemed especially hard before, but now the preparation felt more exhausting than ever. He committed himself to a rigid schedule, studying early at school, working his part-time shift until late, and then falling straight into bed. Exhausted as he was, he kept going, carrying Hatsushiro's support with him through each demanding day. Although loneliness weighed heavily on Yuki, he refused to make Hatsushiro worry about it. Every morning she sent him off with a smile and encouraging words, while he silently promised himself to endure for both of them. His classmates quickly noticed the difference at school. With Hatsushiro absent, Yuki appeared unusually withdrawn. Their observations only reflected what he already knew. Something important felt absent from his days. Even with his classmates teasing and joking around him, Yuki stayed concentrated on studying. He reminded himself that he could not afford to slip now because both his scholarship and future depended on these results. Fujiwara, energetic as always, told Yuki to focus on what truly mattered in life. Yuki argued that his responsibilities could not simply wait, but Fujiwara pointed out that loneliness was affecting both Hatsushiro and Shoko. Utani calmly changed the direction of the conversation. She observed that Hatsushiro seemed patient enough to tolerate some distance. Then she simply asked whether Yuki had spoken with her recently, making him realize how little they had connected all week. Otani hesitated, lowering her gaze while holding back whatever she wanted to say. When Yuki asked what was bothering her, she postponed the conversation until after finals, explaining that the timing was not right. That night, Hatsushiro welcomed him warmly at the entrance. Her familiar bright smile and cheerful greeting announced that dinner was ready. The ordinary scene gave Yuki a brief sense of relief. Despite behaving normally, Hatsushiro realized something was troubling him. Yuki tried hiding it, smiling as he suggested they eat after his shower, though her gentle gaze suggested she was not entirely convinced. While eating curry, Yuki praised the meal and explained that the food itself was not the only reason. Simply knowing she would be waiting helped him continue. Modest as always, Hatsushiro replied that it tasted no different from usual. Unable to keep the question inside, Yuki finally asked whether she was forcing herself to maintain such a cheerful routine. Though nervous about asking, he needed an answer. Her prolonged silence left him uncertain about what she might say. Hatsushiro quietly assured him that she was not pretending. She was only doing what had always felt normal to her. The reassurance eased Yuki's worry, allowing a relieved smile to return. Then an idea occurred to him. Perhaps studying together could give them a refreshing way to spend time. After brief hesitation, he casually suggested it, hoping Hatsushiro would accept. Surprised, she listened while he explained that he had borrowed reference books specifically for her. She hesitated, worrying that using them would prevent Yuki from studying, but he quickly reassured her and said he genuinely wanted to try working together. Soon, they were sitting next to each other at the table. Hatsushiro concentrated closely on an English workbook, while Yuki watched. Seeing the difficulty, he wondered whether the material was really appropriate for her. Hatsushiro simply explained that studying had always been one of her only options. Yuki considered how narrow her life experiences had been. Only after coming here had she started discovering games, smartphones, and other small freedoms once beyond her reach. After school, Hatsushiro had always hurried home to handle chores and study. The same pattern continued without change. Even now, she lived quietly in much the same way, taking care of everything herself without complaining. Facing Yuki, she gently explained that she had become accustomed to managing everything alone. Although her voice remained calm, her smile seemed slightly unnatural. Yuki quietly called her name, sensing something hidden behind the words. He realized that Hatsushiro often avoided revealing her true feelings. Honest expression was difficult for some people, and she was clearly one of them. Rather than pressure her, Yuki decided to wait until she felt ready to speak. Memories surfaced of all her steady little gestures, cooked meals, cheerful greetings, and quiet companionship. Yuki confessed those everyday gestures had rescued him emotionally. They might have seemed insignificant to her, but to him they meant everything. Smiling brightly, he apologized for interrupting her. Then he finally voiced what he had kept inside. She might describe it as persistence, but he believed her quiet strength deserved recognition, and he wanted her to understand that. Hatsushiro remained standing across from him, quietly avoiding his gaze. Yuki watched carefully, sensing that something still remained unspoken. Around them, their classmates continued laughing and talking, completely unaware of the tension between them. When final exams arrived, students filled their time with last-minute review and conversation. Otome approached Yuki directly and pointed out that, in the end, he still had not understood what Hatsushiro truly wanted to say. Yuki admitted she was right but smiled anyway. Whatever uncertainty remained, he had already decided what to do. Once exams ended, he would give Hatsushiro the tickets and make sure she heard him properly this time. Holding the envelope carefully, Yuki explained his idea. He wanted a genuine date without studying or other distractions, spending an entire day together at the theme park, and hoping Hatsushiro could simply enjoy herself. Otome paused and remained silent, her lips parting without any words coming out. Yuki assumed she was nervous about the exams and failed to notice the deeper uneasiness in her expression as she looked away. The last day of finals began beneath a quiet sense of anticipation. Yuki sat upright as the teacher entered carrying the exam papers. Instructions filled the classroom while students shifted into position and prepared themselves. With a serious expression, Yuki received his test paper. Determination filled him as he promised himself to protect his #1 ranking. Some classmates laughed at his intensity, but his concentration remained steady. When the third and final day of exams ended, relief spread throughout the room. Their teacher gathered every exam sheet before dismissing the class. Yuki breathed out deeply, realizing that his long period of preparation was finally finished. Outside the classroom, Yuki proudly lifted the tickets. All his effort had been motivated by more than grades. Hatsushiro was part of the reason too. Answering Otome confidently, he explained how strongly that motivation had carried him. Otome reminded him about their earlier discussion. Her expression grew serious when she mentioned the investigation into Hatsushiro's school. Yuki paused before answering, unsettled by the unusual weight in her tone. Lowering her eyes, Otome hesitantly revealed what she had discovered. She had not wanted to bring it up, but decided Yuki deserved to know the truth regarding the school Hatsushiro claimed she attended. She delivered the result plainly. According to official school records, nobody named Hatsushiro was registered there. That single fact suddenly undermined everything Yuki believed he understood about her. Yuki froze in disbelief, staring ahead without being able to answer. His thoughts struggled to process what he had just learned. For a few seconds, even the simple act of standing felt strangely unfamiliar. Yuki stared at the report, unable to believe what it showed. School records contained no student named Hatsushiro at the institution he thought she attended. Disturbed and confused, he tried staying composed while Otome offered to investigate further. Otome remained cautious, reminding Yuki that assumptions could easily create mistaken conclusions. Still, he could not forget that Hatsushiro had worn that school's uniform when they first met, and both her bag and gym clothes clearly belonged to the same institution. The implications became increasingly serious. Leaning forward, Otome gently urged him to face the uncertainty directly. She asked whether it was finally time to question Hatsushiro about who she really was, causing Yuki's confidence to falter. Otome finally broke the quiet with an apology. Though reluctant, she admitted that hiding the information from him would have weighed on her conscience. She felt obligated to tell him the truth even if doing so upset him. Yuki did not become angry. Instead, he sincerely thanked her for telling him. Holding the sealed envelope, he mentally prepared himself for whatever answers he might soon discover. As Yuki walked, thoughts continued circling through his head. Knowing how difficult it was for Hatsushiro to express herself, he began wondering whether the time had finally come to ask about her past. Then Otome's earlier warning returned to his mind. She had specifically told him not to pressure Hatsushiro into explaining anything. Yuki silently agreed, resolving not to force her to reveal something before she was ready. Inside the shop, Yuki looked over the cakes on display. After considering them briefly, he chose one with quiet confidence. A small smile appeared when he decided he was satisfied with the selection. Later at school, Utani immediately began teasing him. To her, buying the cake resembled a thoughtful husband bringing something sweet home for his wife. Yuki remained confused, struggling to understand what she meant by the comparison. Eventually, Utani's perspective started making sense to him. More than anything, he wanted to see Hatsushiro's reaction. He hoped the cake could express his gratitude for her support during exams, and only then did Utani's earlier words truly resonate. While collecting the cake, Yuki smiled as he imagined giving Hatsushiro the surprise. He wondered whether it would make her happy. At that exact moment, a familiar voice suddenly called his name and startled him. Coach Shimizu appeared with his usual loud enthusiasm, accompanied by several baseball club members. Yuki greeted them politely while trying to conceal his discomfort as the energetic group attracted attention around the shop. To Shimizu, their unexpected meeting apparently represented fate. He joked that divine intervention had brought them together because Yuki was clearly destined to join the baseball club. Even with Shimizu acting cheerfully, Yuki could not completely relax. The coach kept recruiting him despite repeated refusals, making every exchange feel one-sided. The man was not unpleasant, but his constant intensity exhausted Yuki, who admitted he struggled with forceful personalities. Shimizu kept extending the conversation and even offered to recommend a cake. Yuki attempted to decline, but nothing worked. Watching the coach rush away with renewed purpose, he could only sigh and accept once again that Shimizu never listened. As Yuki moved into another aisle, Hatsushiro unexpectedly appeared behind him. Her arrival caught him completely unprepared, and he became slightly flustered when she questioned his nervous expression. Trying to stay composed, Yuki asked whether she had come for groceries. Hatsushiro explained that their soy sauce was nearly gone. He nodded and suggested shopping together since both of them needed household items anyway. Walking beside her, Yuki offered to carry the basket. She answered his offer with a warm, grateful smile. Their pace naturally synchronized as they moved through the store, making the ordinary moment feel unexpectedly comfortable. Curious about his earlier behavior, Hatsushiro asked what he had been examining near the dessert section. Yuki answered vaguely and avoided revealing the truth because he still wanted the purchase to remain a surprise. Privately, Yuki continued hoping to surprise her and decided he could buy the cake another day. Hatsushiro's kindness made him reflect on how much he had changed. Before meeting her, he doubted such thoughtful gestures would ever have occurred to him. Just as the atmosphere became peaceful, Shimizu's booming voice suddenly interrupted them. Holding up an ice cream cake, he called out cheerfully. Yuki lowered his head in frustration and silently blamed the coach for destroying the surprise. The atmosphere immediately became tense. Hatsushiro remained behind Yuki and watched silently. Shimizu's smile gradually disappeared after noticing their expressions and seeing the shopping basket fallen on the floor. Concerned, Yuki turned toward Hatsushiro. He could not understand what had caused such a sudden change. Sensing something was wrong, he gently asked what happened, but her silence only increased his anxiety. At last, Hatsushiro spoke without hesitation. Her tone stayed gentle yet unwavering. Yuki's eyes widened when he understood the single word she said, "Father." The revelation hit him with unexpected force. Silence covered the group. For perhaps the first time, Shimizu simply stared at Hatsushiro without speaking. Yuki struggled to process the discovery that the endlessly talkative coach standing beside him was actually her father. Yuki continued trying to understand what he had heard. Their different surnames confused him, yet the seriousness of the moment made it impossible to believe Hatsushiro had made a mistake. Before Yuki could respond, Hatsushiro moved forward cautiously and tried speaking to Shimizu. The coach suddenly turned toward her, however, his expression changing from surprise into something much more intense. Without warning, Shimizu raised his voice, grabbed Hatsushiro by both shoulders, and demanded an explanation. She stayed motionless and avoided his eyes. Nearby, Yuki froze as the already heavy reunion became even more uncomfortable. Inside the crowded supermarket, Hatsushiro unexpectedly reunites with her father, Coach Shimizu, who confronts her angrily. His loud reaction draws attention from nearby shoppers and makes the entire situation tense and uncomfortable. Shocked by her sudden appearance, Shimizu quickly adjusts his tone and tries to explain himself. His face softens slightly, revealing more surprise than anger, although the emotional intensity remains clearly visible. Yuki silently watches as Shimizu scolds Hatsushiro for disappearing without warning. She lowers her head, visibly shaken, while his hands tighten around her shoulders and place even more pressure on her silence. Yuki steps forward firmly and tells the coach to let Hatsushiro go. Without hesitation, he grips Shimizu's wrist. Hatsushiro remains unable to speak while her father continues demanding an answer without releasing her. Realizing how much attention the argument has attracted, Yuki points out that everyone nearby is watching them. He lowers his voice in an attempt to calm things down. The tension remains, but his intervention creates an opportunity to settle the scene. Overwhelmed with relief, Shimizu suddenly drops to his knees and tightly takes Hatsushiro's hands. Yuki watches from behind and places a steadying hand on the coach's shoulder, recognizing that his emotions appear sincere. Shimizu bows his head, his voice trembling as he asks for a chance to explain himself. Yuki remains cautious but notices the clear change in tone. The earlier anger has disappeared and been replaced by genuine regret. Both men acknowledge that they acted too strongly. Yuki admits his intervention was forceful, while Shimizu confesses that he lost control. Their tension gradually eases as understanding replaces hostility, and they agree to talk properly. Shimizu finally reveals why he reacted so intensely. He had been desperately searching for his missing daughter. Finding her without warning overwhelmed him emotionally. Hatsushiro says nothing, though her features grow slightly gentler. Once everyone is calmer, Shimizu politely asks Yuki to explain everything that happened. Feeling responsible, Yuki reflects on his own decisions, while Hatsushiro stands silently beside him, both understanding that the whole story must now be told. Shimizu offers to drive Yuki home so they can speak somewhere more private. Yuki and Hatsushiro quietly accept and follow him out of the supermarket, continuing the conversation inside the car. During the ride, Yuki asks about their different surnames. Shimizu gently explains that Hatsushiro was his late wife's maiden name, clearing up the confusing difference that had bothered Yuki. Thinking silently, Yuki realizes the misunderstanding might have been prevented if Hatsushiro had told him earlier. Learning that her father had been worried the entire time also makes Shimizu's earlier reaction easier for him to understand. Yuki's thoughts race back to the day he first brought Hatsushiro home. Although they agreed to live together, he now feels guilty that he never contacted her family or confirmed whether her parents knew where she was. Lowering his head, Yuki sincerely apologizes and admits that he should have contacted her parents immediately. Shimizu listens quietly and accepts the apology in a calm, measured way as the situation becomes clearer to him. Deep emotion leaves Shimizu visibly relieved and profoundly grateful. Tears gather in his eyes as he tells Yuki that he is thankful someone like him was the person who found and stayed beside his daughter. Shimizu explains that his anxiety increased with every day Hatsushiro remained missing. Although he kept hoping she would be safe, the relief of finally knowing she is alright now outweighs every trace of anger. Turning toward Yuki sincerely, Shimizu acknowledges that he overreacted at the supermarket. Speaking more calmly, he thanks Yuki for protecting Hatsushiro and apologizes for treating him so harshly during their confrontation. Shimizu then laughs lightly and suggests that Hatsushiro should thank Yuki too. Yuki redirects the praise toward her, explaining how much she has done for him instead. Hatsushiro listens quietly, appearing to accept his words. When the car stops, Hatsushiro politely thanks Yuki and finally smiles again. He answers with a small nod. Outside the apartment, the two pause together after sharing both an important secret and a major turning point. Shimizu stays inside the car to give them privacy, asking Yuki and Hatsushiro to gather her belongings. After another polite exchange, the two step away from the vehicle and head toward the apartment. Silence settles around them outside the building. Neither moves immediately because both seem reluctant to continue. Hatsushiro remains slightly behind Yuki, waiting quietly for him to lead the way. They walk together along familiar paths toward the apartment. Every step feels increasingly heavy as uncertainty hangs between them. Neither says anything, but their expressions reveal that both are thinking about the same separation. At the doorway, Yuki starts unlocking the apartment as Hatsushiro speaks softly. Calmly, she explains that they will pack her possessions and then return to the Shimizu home where her father is waiting. Inside the silent apartment, both remain still for a moment. Yuki glances around the room before offering a faint smile. Trying to lighten the mood, he quietly says he hopes he can meet her mother someday. While gathering her belongings, Hatsushiro reveals that her mother died in an accident several years earlier. Yuki stops in surprise and quietly acknowledges the news, unsure what he could possibly say in response. Hatsushiro enters another room to retrieve her jersey. Left alone, Yuki reflects on how little he actually knows about her despite having shared the same home for so long. Standing near the hallway, Yuki smiles while speaking. Their time living together may be ending, but he tells Hatsushiro that she can come back and visit whenever she likes. His words sound cheerful, though sadness remains underneath. Hatsushiro turns toward him and returns a small smile. She quietly agrees, accepting the new distance about to form between them. Yuki watches her in silence, uncertain about what their relationship will become next. As Hatsushiro walks away, her footsteps echo through the hallway. Yuki remains frozen in the silence, questions filling his mind as he wonders whether this is truly the final time they will ever share the same home. They completed the packing without speaking. Hatsushiro folded her remaining belongings while Yuki stood close by, holding a neatly stacked pile of clothes. Yuki noticed the game console still resting on the shelf and mentioned it. When Hatsushiro refused to take it, he insisted and revealed that he had originally bought it for her. Hoping it might give them a reason to meet again, he offered it with a gentle smile, and she quietly accepted. Clutching the bag firmly, Hatsushiro listened as Yuki reminded her not to push herself too much. She responded with a teasing look before her expression briefly softened. Smiling gently, she promised to take proper care of herself, letting the moment linger before turning away. She headed toward the doorway, briefly touching her hair with her fingers, a familiar habit that Yuki immediately recognized. At the entrance, Yuki paused and asked once more whether there was anything she wanted to tell him. Hatsushiro stopped and avoided his eyes, and the silence between them seemed more revealing than any answer. Her voice shook slightly when she turned around and asked why he thought she was hiding something. Lightly gripping her uniform, she stared at him and searched for the reason behind his concern. Yuki stood still across from her, unsure how much he should reveal. Taking a breath, Yuki explained what he had noticed. Whenever Hatsushiro found it difficult to speak, her fingers moved toward her hair. Lately, that silent sign appeared more often. He admitted that he did not want her carrying everything alone, and simply wished to understand her. For several seconds, surprise widened Hatsushiro's eyes. She looked away and quietly murmured that there was really nothing he needed to worry about. A faint smile returned when she turned back toward him. Hatsushiro repeated that she was all right. Her expression grew gentler, although her voice did not carry its usual confidence. Yuki answered with a small smile, reluctantly accepting what she said. He continued watching her for several seconds before moving aside. Neither spoke much afterward, yet the silence between them seemed filled with everything left unsaid. They left the apartment together, Hatsushiro readjusting her bag, while Yuki held the doorway open. She quietly excused herself, and he responded casually while checking that she had not forgotten any belongings. Cool evening air met them as they approached the waiting car. A man standing beside it waved with a relaxed expression. His greeting interrupted their silence and pulled both of them away from the tension of the walk. Hatsushiro apologized for taking so long, but the man brushed it aside and suggested they probably had plenty to discuss. She reached into her bag as though preparing to give something away, and Yuki hesitated when she turned toward him. Before Yuki could respond, the man thanked him for looking after Hatsushiro. Caught off guard, Yuki tried to answer, but the moment passed as she moved toward the vehicle and the door quietly closed behind her. Only then did Yuki manage to speak, softly admitting that in reality, Hatsushiro had been the one supporting him all this time. Standing beside the car, Yuki froze when Coach Shimizu suddenly made a request. He asked Yuki not to meet Hatsushiro for some time, because he needed to discuss important family matters alone with his daughter. Inside the vehicle, she remained silent and avoided Yuki's gaze. Yuki watched Shimizu light a cigarette and walk a short distance away, leaving little opportunity for discussion or objection. Yuki finally raised the question that had troubled him most. Looking firmly at Shimizu, he asked why Hatsushiro had never been reported missing to the police. Suspicion sharpened his expression while he waited for an explanation. Shimizu stopped in the middle of a step, visibly affected by the question. Yuki continued, asking whether he had truly been worried about Hatsushiro. The coach responded apologetically, and acknowledged that the lack of official involvement was something that needed explaining. Shimizu's tone became serious. Turning directly toward Yuki, he asked whether Yuki had ever noticed bruises on Hatsushiro's body. The atmosphere immediately grew heavier, filled with uncomfortable implications and increasing unease. Yuki stumbled over his answer, explaining that he had accidentally seen the bruises while Hatsushiro was asleep. His face reddened from embarrassment, but Shimizu merely laughed and dismissed the awkward detail. Suddenly, Hatsushiro called out urgently and stepped away from the car. She pleaded with her father not to explain anything further. Shimizu stopped midway through his sentence, the importance of what he was about to reveal hanging heavily between them. He cautiously moved closer and called Hatsushiro by name. She remained silent, caught between fear and hesitation. Looking from her to Yuki, Shimizu insisted that Yuki deserved the truth and that they could no longer keep avoiding it. With a heavy sigh, Shimizu reached toward Hatsushiro and gently moved her bangs aside to expose a bruise. His voice steadied as he explained that her injuries were not accidental. They came from repeated bullying at school, something neither had previously spoken aloud. Yuki's expression went still, his eyes widening at the visible bruise. Unable to look back at him, Hatsushiro tightly closed her eyes. Yuki stared at Hatsushiro, whose distant expression concealed quiet suffering. A bruise remained visible on her forehead while the wind moved her long dark hair. He sensed that something much deeper was wrong than her words could explain. Later, Yuki confronted the adult responsible for handling the situation, who had hesitated to involve the authorities. The man justified his silence by claiming that public consequences could destroy Hatsushiro's future, but Yuki could not accept that reasoning. Shimizu, Hatsushiro's father, explained his thinking. Because he had once been a professional athlete, he feared public attention. Reporting the matter to police could bring intense scrutiny to their household, and he expected gossip and judgment rather than support. Shimizu had hoped that transferring Hatsushiro to another school would solve the problem. Instead, rumors followed her. News that his daughter had been bullied threatened to spread beneath the shadow of his public reputation, causing him to value appearances over her immediate safety. Yuki stood firmly against that choice. He insisted that he would have protected Hatsushiro differently by moving away, changing schools, or taking direct action. Regret appeared on Shimizu's face as Yuki clearly stated what she had truly needed, protection rather than silence. Shimizu folded his arms and gave a strained grin, admitting that he had not been capable of managing everything properly on his own. Although he had eventually considered involving the police, circumstances instead caused him to cross paths with Yuki, changing how events unfolded. An uneasy silence followed as Shimizu considered how even a small delay might have permanently changed Hatsushiro's life. The possibility of lasting damage weighed heavily on Yuki, whose fists tightened as he imagined what could have happened. With her back toward them, Hatsushiro remained silent before finally giving a small nod. Their discussion finished, leaving departure as the settled decision. Shimizu motioned toward the car, and she softly agreed before moving with him. Vehicle doors shut quietly behind Hatsushiro. Without another exchange, she took her seat and the car began moving away. Yuki stayed behind alone, watching it disappear into the distance while unable to find anything to say. Returning to his bedroom, Yuki stopped uncertainly. Returning to the suddenly empty apartment made him uneasy. It was not merely silence that bothered him, but the complete stillness. More than anything, he wanted to hear another person's voice. Yuki entered a nearby cafe, hoping a different environment might help clear his thoughts. The sound of dishes and cheerful conversation sharply contrasted with the silent apartment he had just left. To his surprise, he noticed two familiar people sitting at a nearby table. Utani greeted him with a wave while Fuji looked over casually. Seeing both of them there caught Yuki completely off guard. They opened their discussion with casual small talk. Fuji remarked that finals had only just ended, yet Yuki had already begun studying again. Yuki answered with a quiet nod and avoided meeting his eyes directly. Soon their questions became more personal as they noticed Yuki's gloomy mood and Hatsushiro's absence. Although he hesitated, they continued asking out of genuine concern rather than curiosity. Utani spoke gently while Fuji watched him with steady seriousness. Yuki finally breathed out and realized that they were more than classmates. They had also become Hatsushiro's friends. He stopped pretending everything was fine, and with a small tired smile, promised to explain the entire situation instead of carrying it alone. Yuki described what had happened in a steady but distant voice. Across from him, Utani and Fuji listened closely. As he explained Hatsushiro leaving the apartment and discovering that Shimizu was her father, the weight of the situation settled over the table. Utani immediately confronted Yuki with what she thought. She admitted that her wording might be direct, but refused to soften the warning. If things continued this way, Hatsushiro would eventually reach her breaking point again. Yuki fell silent while processing that warning. The possibility that Hatsushiro might once again stand at an edge struck him deeply. When he asked how Utani knew, she revealed that Hatsushiro herself had confided the truth during a private conversation. Meanwhile, the car stopped outside a quiet house. Hatsushiro stared through the window before softly acknowledging that they had arrived. She tightened her grip on the bag, her face difficult to read. Nothing felt settled, yet she stepped out anyway. Night had fully fallen outside. Hatsushiro quietly followed her father along the path toward the house. When the door opened, she paused for a brief moment, a trace of hesitation crossing her expression before she entered. Back at the cafe, Utani leaned forward with her hands folded and recalled seeing bruises on Hatsushiro. Although everyone naturally assumed bullying, Utani admitted that something about the situation had never completely convinced her. To investigate, she contacted an acquaintance from Hatsushiro's supposed school. What she learned suggested something more complicated than simple bullying. One student had suddenly stopped attending about 2 months earlier. Yuki listened in shock as Shimizu's claim that Hatsushiro could not fit in began to seem different. Doubt entered Yuki's thoughts. He repeated the possibility to himself. What if she had not actually been bullied in the way he assumed? Until this moment, he had only understood Hatsushiro as a victim. At the house, Shimizu stood directly before his daughter and told her that it was time to explain everything herself. Hatsushiro tightly held her bag, uncertain about what she could reveal. Shadows crossed her face before she eventually nodded in silence. She lowered her head while trembling, unable to force the words out. Her body, however, communicated enough. Shimizu watched quietly as understanding settled over him, finally releasing a long breath before saying only, "I see." A clenched fist slammed into the wall beside Hatsushiro, the impact tossing her hair aside. Without shouting, Shimizu delivered his judgment. Thick tension remained between them, filled with accusations that neither needed to voice directly. Yuki's footsteps echoed across the quiet street as he ran, his breathing becoming heavier with every stride. Determination drove him forward while he kept his attention fixed on the destination ahead. Without wasting time, he confronted the girl before him. Confusion grew when he heard her calm denial because she showed none of the fear or desperation he expected. Her words directly contradicted the assumptions that had brought him rushing there. Utani's explanation provided the missing context. Hatsushiro had not been deliberately bullied from the beginning. Small teasing incidents gradually escalated until a light push caused a serious fall and left her face bleeding. Nobody directly targeted her afterward, but everyone stayed silent instead of defending her, which hurt even more. Bruised and shaken, Hatsushiro stood with a quiet but steady voice. She lowered her head as guilt filled her apology. She was not apologizing for being hurt, but perhaps for making other people carry the weight of her suffering. After the incident, Hatsushiro gradually withdrew from everyone. Rumors spread around her, and her changed expression made classmates uncomfortable. One after another, they began creating distance from her. Otani remained calm while acknowledging Yuki's intentions. She understood that his indirect approach came from patience. Rather than force a confrontation, he had chosen to wait until Hatsushiro could reveal her feelings in her own way. Her tone became slightly sharper. Yuki had already noticed there were things Hatsushiro could not say, yet he never directly asked about them. Utani was not blaming him, but wanted him to consider why he had held himself back. Despite everything that happened, Hatsushiro had never truly wanted to leave. She still clung to something, perhaps hope or emotional connection. Utani urged Yuki to understand that intervention was not always wrong, and that even well-intentioned inaction could cause harm. Yuki immediately started running again, regret giving strength to every step. The rain-soaked pavement failed to slow him as his shoes splashed through puddles. Frustration burned inside because he knew he had failed to act when it mattered. Desperation finally overcame his restraint. Filled with emotion, Yuki shouted Hatsushiro's name, refusing to remain passive or silent any longer. A girl lay motionless across the wooden floor with new bruises visible over her body. Her eyes remained closed, yet the pain was obvious in the strained lines of her face. Cruel words followed another violent shove. Her quiet apology was answered only with anger. Held by the collar, she trembled helplessly beneath repeated abuse while a hand pulled at her clothes and stripped away the little dignity she had left. The man screamed again in fury. Her attempt to explain herself only triggered more accusations. Lying on the floor, Hatsushiro could not defend herself as she was blamed merely for interacting with classmates. Nearby, her torn ribbon remained discarded. Her bruised lips whispered the same word once more. The voice was barely audible, yet she still called toward the person responsible for her pain. Elsewhere in memory, a child screamed that same word. A blood-stained woman remained motionless across the pavement. The young Hatsushiro clung desperately to her mother's unmoving body, crying without understanding what had happened. Relief briefly reached Hatsushiro when her mother moved and managed a weak smile despite the injuries. The little girl held tightly to her hand, sobbing through a crushing sense of guilt. That painful recollection stayed with her permanently. Beneath a dark sky filled with stars, flowers later covered the place where everything happened. Her mother's final request remained in Hatsushiro's mind: be a good girl and help your father. The words became a lifelong responsibility rather than a simple wish. From then onward, every step carried remorse. Hatsushiro carried personal blame for every consequence afterward. One selfish moment and one wrong decision seemed, in her eyes, to have changed her entire world. After her mother died, the household changed completely. Her father, once warm and gentle, became emotionally distant and rigid. The joy disappeared from his voice, replaced by strict orders and cold silence. From that point, Hatsushiro accepted responsibilities far beyond what a child should carry. Books replaced toys, while her grieving father left her to fill the empty role her mother had occupied. She quietly tried to hold the household together herself. Requests came constantly, and Hatsushiro rarely refused any of them. She interrupted her studies to wash dishes and handle laundry while her father stayed seated. Even as exhaustion accumulated, she responded to each request with quiet obedience. Her responsibilities soon included preparing meals despite having little experience cooking. Her father's remarks hurt, but she never argued. Instead, Hatsushiro looked determined and promised herself that she would simply try harder. Later, while feeding a stray cat, Hatsushiro quietly admitted her struggle. Her meals lacked the warmth of her mother's cooking, and no matter how hard she tried, her father never smiled. Still, she held on to the fragile hope that she could someday restore a little of what they had lost. Speaking to the cat brought her some comfort. Hatsushiro stood with renewed determination and, wearing a small smile, decided that she would continue working even harder. When she returned home, her absence had clearly been noticed and a scolding came immediately. Someone had genuinely worried about her. Hatsushiro listened in surprise to the sudden burst of concern, and for a brief moment the silence between them felt heavy but sincere. Hatsushiro quietly apologized while covering part of her face. Her father's tension softened into regret, but the emotional damage remained. From then onward, sincere apologies gradually disappeared while angry outbursts became increasingly normal. Even through the pain, Hatsushiro found ways to justify it. If sacrificing herself could make her father smile again, she believed the suffering had value. She endured his cold looks, harsh remarks, and constant expectations because believing in that purpose helped her survive. Back in the kitchen, Hatsushiro practiced cooking once more. She carefully measured each flavor and tasted dishes as if comparing them with memories. Every slice and stir pursued the familiar warmth of meals her mother once served. The food represented more than taste. It carried part of their family history. Hatsushiro had recreated the same curry her mother prepared during happier times, remembering the laughter, smiles, and conversations once shared around that simple dish. Steam rose from the finished pot as Hatsushiro smiled with satisfaction. In her hopeful memory, her father's old warm grin seemed to return as well. Hatsushiro watched closely when her father tasted the curry she had worked so hard to recreate. His expression suddenly froze as the familiar flavor triggered memories, and in a quiet voice he whispered her name. The atmosphere changed without warning. His spoon clattered down and the plate was tipped into the trash. His voice shook with frustration as accusations followed. The familiar taste had brought back memories he could not bear. His glare hardened while he questioned her motives. His words wounded Hatsushiro deeply by implying that she was trying to replace her mother. Her breath caught as the meal she had poured so much effort into remained discarded and uneaten. Elsewhere, Yuki raced through the streets, breathing hard and covered in sweat. His steps grew uneven, but he kept pushing forward. Every second mattered because he needed to reach Hatsushiro before something irreversible happened. A passerby pointed him in the right direction. Relief hit Yuki when he spotted the house with the distinctive red triangular roof. Despite burning legs, he rushed toward it with urgency and fear weighing heavily on him. Yuki lowered his head beneath a wave of guilt. He understood that getting involved might create problems for Fuji and the others, yet he could not stop himself. His words carried hesitation, though his gratitude toward his friends remained sincere. Fuji answered with an easygoing grin that brushed aside the seriousness. Instead of asking for anything important, he demanded a jumbo parfait as repayment. The casual but genuine kindness reduced the tension and left Yuki briefly speechless. At the gate, Yuki wiped sweat from his forehead. Exhaustion no longer mattered. If buying a ridiculous parfait was the price of his friend's help, he would happily pay it. Right now, he was willing to do whatever was necessary. Rather than use the doorbell, Yuki quietly entered through the open gate. A normal confrontation would not work, and he believed the man inside would never willingly answer. The name Shimizu, displayed on the wall, felt ominously cold. Moving into the garden, Yuki noticed that the lock had been left open. Scattered pots and visible neglect suggested chaos inside. Each of his steps seemed louder than the last, but now that he had entered, turning back was no longer possible. Yuki pushed open the door and immediately froze. Finding it unlocked made him even more uneasy. Something was clearly wrong. Holding his phone tightly, he cautiously stepped inside as the entrance shut behind him. The interior was a mess, with books scattered everywhere. At the center of the room, Kotori lay collapsed and motionless. Her bag had spilled open beside her while the legs of a man stood ominously nearby. Hatsushiro lay weakly on the floor, breathing shallowly with unfocused eyes. As the boy knelt nearby, a small white object caught his attention. He looked toward her bag and noticed something unusual had slipped out, something clearly meant to remain hidden. Curious, he lifted the small white box. The moment Hatsushiro recognized it, her body jolted and her eyes widened in panic. Her reaction made it obvious that the object carried far more meaning than he understood. Without warning, Hatsushiro lunged toward him in desperation. Her trembling hands reached for the device and grabbed it tightly before his startled reaction could stop her. Sitting upright, she held the object firmly while breathing unevenly. Fear remained in her eyes as she looked toward the hallway. A dark figure slowly approached, and immediate recognition made her grip tighten around the item. Her father stepped closer with rage burning in his eyes. His voice rose as fury twisted his expression. Without hesitation, he kicked Hatsushiro down and ignored her cries. Hatsushiro collapsed while protecting the white box beneath her body as a heavy stomp struck her back. Despite the pain, she refused to release it. Her breathing caught, and her entire body shook from fear and agony. The assault continued without pause. Each stomp landed while her father shouted about the burdens she had caused him. His rage grew as he accused her of being ungrateful and reminded her who had provided everything. Later, Hatsushiro knelt silently among the damaged remains of their home. The curry she had made sat discarded in the trash, no apology followed, and the rejection became painfully clear from the way her cooking had been thrown away. Guilt weighed heavier in her heart than anything else. Hatsushiro believed she was responsible for her mother's death, and living every day as a replacement for what had been lost became her only sense of purpose. Walking alone through the streets, she wondered what she had actually been living for. One quiet desire finally surfaced. Just once, she wanted to experience happiness as herself rather than as someone's replacement. Rain continued falling as Hatsushiro moved closer to the ledge, despair weighing on her heart. Alone before the city below, she began to lose her resolve until a strong hand suddenly pulled her backward. A gentle, familiar voice cut through the silence. Hearing her name spoken with genuine warmth made Hatsushiro freeze. The simple call broke through the chaos in her thoughts because, for the first time in years, someone sounded sincerely concerned about her. Collapsed on the ground, Hatsushiro held the box close while tears filled her eyes. Yuki crouched beside her and met her gaze with steady concern. Yuki protectively positioned himself in front of Hatsushiro as Shimizu entered. The man's casual expression concealed obvious hostility while he mocked Yuki's presence. Even under the threat, Yuki refused to move or retreat. Shimizu responded with a cold smirk and dismissed the confrontation. He described his abuse as parental discipline and justified it through family authority. Yuki listened quietly, but his clenched hands and hardened gaze revealed anger that would not remain controlled much longer. Yuki's expression hardened when he addressed Shimizu directly. Calm yet unwavering, he challenged the man's arrogance and made one thing clear: there would be consequences, and the police would hear about what he had done. Holding his ground, Yuki listed the evidence. Hatsushiro's bruises and the scene he had just witnessed were impossible to deny. Justice could no longer be avoided. Shimizu stayed silent, his tense body showing the weight of those words. Pretending not to care, Shimizu gave a cold smile and dared Yuki to report him. He showed no fear of exposure and mocked the threat openly. Yuki, surprised by that confidence, struggled to understand why the man seemed so certain nothing could happen to him. Suddenly, Shimizu rushed in and gripped Yuki's collar. Anger showed beneath his smile. Yuki refused to back down as the tension between them intensified dangerously. With distorted pride, Shimizu threatened to expose everything about Yuki and Hatsushiro. He loudly referenced the time they had lived together, clearly intending to twist the story in his favor. Shimizu suddenly struck Yuki before anyone could react. Hatsushiro begged him to stop, but her plea was ignored as the punch landed. Even after the blow, Yuki stayed close to her and continued shielding her with his presence. A smug expression spread across Shimizu's face as he listed everything Yuki stood to lose: suspension, expulsion, and damage to the school's reputation. He even used the baseball team's future as another threat. The manipulation continued when Shimizu dragged Fuji into the situation. He claimed that if Yuki acted against him, his best friend's dreams and future in baseball could also be destroyed. Shimizu pulled Hatsushiro by the hair and pressed the threat further. He accused Yuki of ignoring what she wanted and claimed exposing the abuse would only harm everyone involved. Pain crossed her face as she remained silent and trembled in his grip. A hand pressed down against Hatsushiro's head until she complied. When Shimizu demanded confirmation, she gave a weak nod. Whether caused by fear or resignation, her body obeyed even as everything inside her resisted. Leaning against the wall, Yuki struggled to remain conscious while Shimizu forced Hatsushiro closer to him. In a mocking, commanding tone, the man ordered her to speak directly to Yuki. Kneeling weakly, Hatsushiro forced herself to smile and thanked Yuki for coming. Her words sounded gentle, yet pain filled every syllable. She tried to comfort him while hiding her own despair, convincing herself that his effort alone was enough. Her expression softened with sincere warmth as she spoke admiringly about Yuki's dream. Encouragement hid the sadness underneath, but the conviction in her eyes revealed what she intended. She was preparing to let him go. Yuki immediately understood what her tone meant. This was not reassurance but a farewell. Watching Hatsushiro quietly accept her fate tore at him while Shimizu mocked his resolve and ridiculed the idea of sacrificing everything for someone powerless. Defeat briefly entered Yuki's face. His scholarship, future, and everything he had worked toward suddenly hung in the balance. Shimizu's words dug deeply, reminding him that one decision could damage both his life and Hatsushiro's. Shimizu continued manipulating him beneath a calm voice, praising Fuji's potential while cigarette smoke drifted around him. Every compliment carried hidden intent, presenting himself as reasonable while pushing Yuki further into uncertainty. Yuki stood motionless, caught between fury and uncertainty. Each comment twisted Hatsushiro's suffering into something supposedly noble. Shimizu's false kindness tried to convince him that remaining silent was the only sensible option. Hatsushiro trembled as Shimizu tightened his grip. His promise to forget everything was really another threat disguised as mercy. Her broken expression showed exactly what Yuki could no longer accept. Then came another cruel, deliberate order. Yuki's hands shook while humiliation filled the room. Tears gathered in Hatsushiro's eyes as she waited for what came next. and every second tested the limits of Yuki's restraint. His anger finally exploded. Yuki moved before hesitation could return, and drove his fist into Shimizu's face. Years of suppressed fear broke apart in that instant, shifting the balance of power through a single act of defiance. Blood stained Yuki's shirt as his anger poured out. With a sharp voice, he rejected everything Shimizu had forced upon them. Hatsushiro watched through tears, stunned as Yuki stood firm with strength she thought had already been crushed. Hatsushiro remained stunned on the floor, unable to understand why Yuki had acted so recklessly. Her breath caught as she stared up at him, shaken by the punch. Kneeling before her, Yuki firmly held her shoulders with clear determination. Although bruised and bleeding, Yuki looked at her calmly. His expression softened without losing resolve. Before she could answer, he reminded Hatsushiro of the simple reason he acted. He was her boyfriend. Shimizu groaned and began rising from the floor while holding his injured face. Rage increased with every word as he lashed out at Yuki. Hatsushiro froze while Yuki kept her close and positioned himself between her and whatever Shimizu might do next. The threatened consequences quickly piled up. Shimizu spoke of guilt, destroyed futures, and broken friendships as though delivering an overwhelming sentence against them. At last, Shimizu erupted completely. His fists trembled and his eyes widened as he shouted a final demand. Yuki stayed silent and prepared himself while Hatsushiro shook beside him and tension filled the room. Yuki remained standing with tense shoulders, speaking in a low and conflicted voice. He understood the possible consequences and acknowledged the weight behind Shimizu's threats, yet some hesitation still remained. Then determination replaced doubt. Yuki challenged every consequence Shimizu kept raising, and questioned what price they were truly asking him to accept. Hatsushiro and Shimizu both fell silent as his stance became completely resolute. Panic overtook Hatsushiro as she grabbed Yuki's arms. Tears formed while she begged him to reconsider, reminding him through a breaking voice that his dream of becoming a doctor and his entire future could now be threatened. Yuki answered calmly that school was not the only route toward his future, and that another path could always be found. Overwhelmed, Hatsushiro promised that she would somehow repay what he was risking through her own sincere effort. Hatsushiro lowered her head as guilt became difficult to contain. Her hands shook and frustration filled her eyes. Everything Yuki had built was now endangered because of her, yet she could also see the sincerity behind his decision. Yuki answered those heavy feelings with a light smile. Her guilt was obvious, but he refused to let it control the situation, and made it clear that he would not allow her distress to burden him. Seeing Hatsushiro's confused expression, Yuki quietly admired the rare innocence in it. Her blank look and uncertain words briefly reminded him of a simpler time before the situation had grown so serious. Taking a step away, he confronted everything with fresh composure. The decision had already been made, and could not be undone. Sitting beside Hatsushiro, Yuki reasoned that ignoring her feelings or forcing her to bear every consequence alone would be far worse. Folding his arms, Yuki spoke with final certainty. He had not come there merely to let Hatsushiro decide everything alone, and then disappear into silence again. Shimizu responded with cold calculation. He argued that revealing the truth would hurt Kotori most of all. The twisted reasoning was designed not only to protect himself, but also to fill both of them with doubt about resisting him. Yuki leaned toward Hatsushiro and spoke boldly with a slightly playful tone. He promised that when the time came, he would take her hand. Blushing in surprise, she stammered and could not tell whether he was completely serious or teasing her. Her heart raced while she struggled for a response and stared at Yuki in amazement. He smiled gently from across from her and openly admitted that his intentions were selfish too. Turning back toward Shimizu, Yuki spoke with absolute clarity. His dreams could wait, but Hatsushiro was irreplaceable to him. Frustrated, Shimizu scratched his head as he realized that threats and manipulation had stopped controlling Yuki. Desperation replaced Shimizu's confidence. He turned toward Hatsushiro and demanded that she speak instead, hoping that if Yuki refused to retreat, his daughter could still be pressured into doing so. Yuki reached for Hatsushiro's hand and steadied her. He urged her to finally speak honestly instead of sacrificing herself for everyone around her. For once, someone was giving her permission to be heard rather than to protect others. Smiling with calm certainty, Yuki placed his trust entirely in her decision. Beside him, Kotori steadied her breathing and faced her fear. Even as her father shouted for obedience, she did not step backward, and determination gradually replaced hesitation. Every movement toward honesty required effort. Hatsushiro glanced down, silently apologized to her absent mother, and drew a deep breath. When she looked up again, her eyes were sharper and no longer clouded by the same fear and guilt. Emotion suddenly broke through as Hatsushiro shouted everything she had held inside. Gripping Yuki's hand tightly, she finally released the feelings she had buried for years all at once. Tears streamed down her face as she declared her choice. She no longer wanted to live under constant control and finally admitted that she wished to stay beside someone who truly cared for her. Her father stood speechless in shock. Anger, grief, and newfound strength blended together in her final words. Hatsushiro refused to yield again. She was not speaking simply to rebel, but to claim her freedom and choose her own future regardless of the consequences. Warmth spread through Yuki as he felt her grip tighten around his hand. Pride showed on his face because she had finally spoken entirely for herself. Nobody forced those words from her, and the moment belonged completely to Hatsushiro. Shimizu remained frozen, unable to hide his disbelief. His voice faltered as he realized that even his daughter was rejecting him. Yuki pulled Hatsushiro closer and protected her while the room filled with renewed tension. Without responding, Shimizu turned and walked toward the exit. Yuki called after him and demanded an explanation, but the man gave none. Silence filled the room while the door slowly opened behind him. At the doorway, Shimizu looked back one final time. A faint expression crossed his face, neither clearly angry nor regretful, before he closed the door and left without another word. Silence returned. Yuki and Hatsushiro sat close together beside the wall without speaking. Around them lay scattered remnants of what had once trapped her: abandoned books, bags, and an unplugged laptop. The room remained still, but freedom had finally begun. After a quiet moment, Yuki gently asked whether Hatsushiro was all right. Kotori answered him with a small smile and a calm voice. Confidence slowly appeared as she repeated the answer without trembling. Her words finally carried no fear. Yuki responded with quiet approval and a proud smile, and Hatsushiro's joy grew as she recognized what she had accomplished. Looking toward Yuki reminded Hatsushiro where much of her courage had come from. Knowing he stood beside her had helped recover strength she had buried for years. As tears returned, she softly reminded herself that she had finally said everything. When the realization fully reached her, Yuki suddenly pulled Hatsushiro into his arms. Her initial surprise quickly became comfort. The simple embrace communicated more than words and gave her a sense of safety she had desperately needed. Closing her eyes, Hatsushiro listened as Yuki gently reassured her. She had been frightened and still managed to speak, and he told her that she had done well. Nothing more needed to be explained. Her tears finally poured freely. All the fear she had kept contained broke loose through uncontrollable sobs. Hatsushiro shook while clinging to Yuki, finally allowing the emotions that had trapped her to escape. Overwhelmed, she pressed herself deeper into his embrace. Yuki held her tightly, uncertain for only a moment before becoming steady. His comforting words reached her while her shoulders shook with relief. A smile gradually appeared through Hatsushiro's tears. Gratitude filled her as she looked up at Yuki. He had supported her this far, and now she wanted to support him too, acknowledging both his strength and the pain he carried. Yuki could not answer immediately because her words broke through his own composure. He wrapped his arms around her again, and together they allowed their emotions to finally release. Afterward, a long quiet settled around them. Seen from above, they remained close and held each other while the world seemed to slow around them. Among scattered bags and damaged surroundings, they stayed together because they had endured what had happened.
He first began playing baseball in elementary school, motivated by little more than simple childhood curiosity. By middle school, he had become the ace pitcher and proudly wore jersey number 4. Match after match placed him at the center of the mound, earning attention and respect. His efforts carried the team into the Koshien semifinals and established the highest point of his youth career. From his first year onward, he was selected for the top team, an unusual achievement. When the professional draft arrived, a Tokyo team chose him with its second pick, confirming his position among the most promising players. Away from baseball, his life gained another source of happiness when he married Kuroha Hatsushiro. Their wedding was modest but meaningful, shared with people who had supported both of them. Their happiness grew the following year, when Kuroha gave birth to their daughter. Looking down at the newborn child, he felt overwhelmed by a quiet warmth and wonder he had never experienced before. Until then, nearly everything in his life had progressed smoothly and successfully. Confidence carried him forward in both baseball and family life. Surrounded by support and purpose, he never imagined that one sudden change could unravel everything. That change arrived through injury. 8 years into his professional career, his shoulder failed and took away the ability that had defined his life as a pitcher. Public attention disappeared almost immediately. Reporters who once competed to speak with him now passed without recognition. Walking through the school gates as an ordinary person, he felt the contrast with his former life more heavily than ever. Refusing to remain trapped by what he had lost, Shimizu focused on what was still possible. He would not live in resentment. Another career waited ahead, and he clenched his fist with quiet determination to begin again despite the uncertain path. His purpose had not vanished, it had simply changed. At home, warm food, cheerful greetings, and the smiles of his wife and daughter still waited for him every day. Just as life seemed stable again, another tragedy struck. His wife was hospitalized after a sudden accident and remained unconscious while depending on medical machines. Sitting beside her bed, Shimizu held her hand tightly and felt completely helpless. While he sat in silence, his daughter asked whether he was all right. Her concerned voice broke what little composure he still had. Tears ran down his cheeks as he tried to answer, but only his daughter's name came out before emotion overwhelmed him. Reality returned when Shimizu remembered that he was not truly alone. His daughter still depended on him more than ever. Holding her close, he resolved to remain strong for her sake. He took a job in sales and endured harsh treatment, pressure, and constant correction. Through it all, Shimizu held on to one promise. Whether Kuroha could witness it or not, he would protect their daughter and raise her with everything he had. Managing both work and home eventually became overwhelming. Cooking, cleaning, childcare, and employment filled every day until the strain grew too great and forced him to resign. Yet life still failed to improve. Sitting at his desk in exhaustion, Shimizu stared toward his computer before his eyes shifted to a framed photograph of Kuroha. Speaking aloud, he admitted how far he believed he had fallen. Despair gradually settled over him. Sitting alone on a couch surrounded by scattered toys, he felt the absence of the family life he once knew, and his voice faded before he could finish the thought. The days moved slowly, each one blending into another. Shimizu followed his routines without happiness or energy, while his daughter remained nearby watching the same television programs. Eventually, he quietly told her that it was time to leave. They went outside together and walked hand in hand toward a familiar place. Flowers surrounded the area where Kuroha now rested, while bottled water and other offerings showed that people still remembered her. Standing there beside his daughter, Shimizu noticed how quietly she focused on the flowers. In her own way, Kotori had continued watching over Kuroha throughout the entire day. With Kuroha gone, he finally understood that raising Kotori now belonged entirely to him. Watching his daughter stand silently nearby reminded him of the responsibility he still carried. His instructions soon lost their warmth. He told Kotori to stop playing and spend her time studying instead. She softly answered yes and obeyed without resistance, and from that point studying became nearly her only activity at home. Fatigue accumulated with every passing day. When dirty dishes piled up once again, Shimizu felt overwhelmed by ordinary responsibilities. Rather than ask calmly, he shouted in frustration and demanded Kotori's help. Soon he began assigning far more than dishes. Without thinking carefully, Shimizu made Kotori handle every household chore. She always answered yes, and completed each task. It was no longer proper discipline, but a way for him to unload pressure, and somewhere inside he understood that. Responsibilities continued piling onto Kotori, yet she never refused. She folded laundry, cleaned rooms, and carried things in silence. Shimizu watched from across the room, noticing how perfectly she obeyed every command, while he remained seated and detached from the burden he had transferred to her. Years of controlling behavior eventually became cruelty. No matter how much he yelled, hit, or punished her, Kotori rarely resisted. Each incident stripped away more of Shimizu's restraint, as he convinced himself that obedience could simply be forced into her. Kotori continued working as though nothing had happened. She silently chopped vegetables, keeping her hands steady despite the pain. Bent over the counter, she prepared dinner without making a single complaint. Watching her work, Shimizu reassured himself that everything was justified. He had raised, clothed, and fed her, and that sense of entitlement blinded him to his own behavior. He even smiled while imagining that he could not possibly be wrong. In Shimizu's mind, Kotori naturally owed him obedience because everything she had came from him. At last, however, she turned and faced him. After years of silence, one desperate refusal escaped her lips, and the word no shattered his delusion. Staggering alone through the streets, Shimizu struggled to understand what had happened. The daughter he had treated like a possession had finally chosen to leave. Her rejection struck him harder than any physical blow because she was no longer under his control. For the first time, Shimizu began seeing Kotori as an individual rather than a subordinate. The girl he pictured before him was no longer merely the obedient child who silently followed every instruction. Memories returned of promises made beside his wife's hospital bed. Shimizu had vowed to protect their daughter and raise her lovingly. Now that promise echoed back with painful bitterness. He remembered Kotori's childhood laughter and the way her small arms once wrapped around his neck. She had been everything to him then, a precious daughter he proudly lifted into the air. As he wandered through empty streets, regret gradually overwhelmed Shimizu. Covering his face with one hand, he finally questioned himself. When had everything gone wrong, and how had love transformed into control? Lost in those thoughts, he accidentally collided with a stranger. The man's sharp voice pulled him back to reality. Insults followed, yet Shimizu barely reacted, not because he ignored them, but because he no longer had energy left to respond. Thrown onto the ground, Shimizu felt pain shoot through his body as repeated punches landed. Each impact seemed strangely familiar, and he realized this agony resembled what he had inflicted many times upon someone far more defenseless. Surrounded by attackers and ridicule, Shimizu stayed silent. Their insults echoed around him, but guilt hurt more deeply than anything they said. Even when they grabbed his hair and demanded money, he offered almost no resistance. Instead of fear, another emotion finally stirred. Shimizu slowly rose and clenched his fists. He knocked one attacker backward and pulled another down, fighting for the first time not from anger but from desperate instinct. One by one, he struck the attackers until nobody remained standing. Breathing heavily, Shimizu finally collapsed against the last opponent, drained of rage and filled only with sorrow. Tears streamed down his face as anger gave way to anguish. He screamed into the empty night, receiving no answer. His question about where he had been looking all this time was directed entirely at himself. Memories flooded back as Shimizu pictured Kotori's suffering. Every blow, punishment and emotional outburst had come from him. Facing those memories at last, he understood how deeply he had hurt his own daughter. While Shimizu stood frozen in guilt, retaliation approached from behind. A sudden strike drove a blade into his back as one of the attackers returned with a weapon and clear intent. Dark blood spread across the ground. Slowly turning his head, Shimizu understood what had happened and realized that this time nobody would be there to protect him.
A loud ringing phone shattered the quiet morning. Hatsushiro sat upright in surprise, immediately remembering the troubling events from the previous night. Across the room, Yuki woke groggily and looked equally startled by such an early call. Hatsushiro quickly approached the phone, visible uneasiness in her movements. Sensing her hesitation, Yuki offered to answer instead, but she suspected instinctively that the call might involve her father. With steady hands, Hatsushiro picked up the receiver and introduced herself. Her voice remained composed, although tension hid beneath each word. Yuki watched closely and recognized how hard she was working to remain calm. Thoughts returned to the long hours she had spent waiting at home. Despite everything, her father never called or returned to explain himself. After the chaos of the previous evening, they had stayed at Hatsushiro's place hoping to hear something. A lawyer on the other end began explaining what had happened. Hatsushiro's face froze as she absorbed the information, unable to completely separate the news from the fact that the man involved was still her father. The scene had become chaotic as police restrained a man on the floor. Another figure sat nearby with wide eyes, frozen in shock by what had just happened. Disbelief filled the atmosphere. Memories of the fight replayed clearly. It had started when someone attempted to stop a knife attack, but the confrontation escalated quickly. The struggle became violent until others intervened, and in the confusion, an attempt at self-protection went far beyond its original purpose. Any remaining hope collapsed when Hatsushiro heard that the victim had died. She listened while the lawyer described fatal injuries to vital areas and explained that the consequences could potentially include a life sentence. Emotion overwhelmed Hatsushiro as she stood motionless, uncertain what she should do. Yuki gently placed a hand on her shoulder and grounded her in the present, both of them understanding that they needed answers. Still shaken, Hatsushiro turned toward Yuki with quiet determination. Worry filled her eyes when she asked him to come with her because she did not want to face what came next alone. Yuki answered immediately with a gentle smile. Taking her hand, he reassured Hatsushiro that he had planned to accompany her from the beginning. His calm reassurance supplied the strength she required. They both recognized how emotionally exhausting the coming day would be and agreed they needed rest first. Hatsushiro smiled quietly, grateful for Yuki's honesty and presence. After a few final words, they separated for the night and prepared themselves for the difficult visit ahead. The following day, they reached the detention center and sat together before the visitation window, waiting in silence for Hatsushiro's father to appear. Yuki was shocked by how exhausted and unkempt the man looked. Hatsushiro's father greeted them casually, but strain showed clearly on his face. He dismissed their concern with forced humor and hollow words meant to prevent them from pitying him. Hatsushiro addressed him calmly and called him father. His response carried an admission of his mistakes, the weight of his choices, and the punishment he now understood he had to accept. At first Hatsushiro hesitated, but then firmly repeated, "Father?" The man gave a tired smile and told her she could speak more casually. She lowered her eyes, clenched her hands, and slowly rejected that suggestion. With composed honesty, Hatsushiro spoke directly from her heart. Regardless of everything he had done, he was still the father who raised her. Mistakes in time could not simply erase that relationship, and the unexpected warmth in her words cut through the silence. Looking at him with a gentle smile, Hatsushiro said she hoped they could share a meal again after he was released. Remembering simpler days, she specifically mentioned curry, the dish he had once genuinely enjoyed. Her father released a deep sigh and finally lowered some of the emotional walls he had built. Behind his exhausted eyes, feelings surfaced as he processed the kindness in her words. Tears eventually fell as he thanked his daughter. Hatsushiro watched gently and promised that she would wait for him. This time, he vowed not to waste the chance, and something broken between them began slowly repairing itself across the glass. Yuki quietly smiled while watching Hatsushiro speak. Her kindness was obvious even as she laughed and dismissed compliments. He could not help thinking that she was sometimes far too selfless for her own well-being. As visiting time approached its end, Hatsushiro's father offered final advice and asked her to care for herself even if she could not come often. Then he requested a private conversation alone with Yuki. Before leaving, Hatsushiro looked back with a soft, slightly playful expression. Rather than accept her father's suggestion to visit rarely, she confidently promised to come regularly, surprising him with the certainty in her voice. Once Hatsushiro had left, Yuki and her father sat facing each other through the glass. The atmosphere changed immediately, becoming quieter and more serious as the older man prepared to speak honestly. Shimizu lowered his head and thanked Yuki sincerely. He admitted that despite everything he had done, Yuki had continued protecting Kotori. Hearing such gratitude left Yuki unsure how to respond. Then Shimizu brought out a bank book and explained that he wanted Yuki to take it. The unexpected offer confused him, and he immediately questioned why such an important item was being handed over. Shimizu explained that the account contained money saved during his professional baseball career. Despite Yuki's skeptical reaction, he asked him to use it whenever necessary for Hatsushiro. Yuki, however, did not immediately accept the responsibility. The older man did not argue. Instead, he calmly explained that if he merely wanted forgiveness, he could have given the bank book directly to Hatsushiro and used the gesture to soften her judgment. When Yuki finally opened the bank book, the balance shocked him. The amount was enormous, and he asked whether there had been some mistake. Shimizu simply told him to use the money whenever Kotori genuinely needed it. Yuki could not help questioning the security of the account. Protecting such a fortune with the password 1111 seemed ridiculous. Shimizu gave an amused smirk at the contrast between the massive sum and the simple code. The meaning behind 111 then became clear. It was not random carelessness but the birthday of Kotori's late mother, Kuroha, whose birthday fell on November 11 and remained deeply important to Shimizu. Remembering something Shimizu had previously said about relationships, Yuki asked him to explain. Rather than answer directly, Shimizu recalled an old conversation in which someone had called it foolish to sacrifice everything for a single woman. Yuki pressed further and asked whether Shimizu had actually been talking about himself. The older man turned away and refused to elaborate, leaving it uncertain whether he had forgotten or simply did not want to confront the memory. Despite the uneasy conversation, Yuki ultimately accepted the bank book and bowed respectfully. The gesture did not represent forgiveness, but it did acknowledge the responsibility Shimizu was trying to entrust to him. A guard announced that visiting time was over. As they prepared to separate, Shimizu stopped Yuki with one final request. He hesitated before speaking, clearly aware that he might not deserve to ask anything more. Shimizu bowed deeply and entrusted Kotori's future to Yuki. Yuki accepted the responsibility without hesitation and gave his word. With calm confidence, he also reminded the older man that he needed to take care of himself. Walking together afterward, Hatsushiro asked what Yuki and her father had discussed privately. He hesitated because he was unsure how much to reveal, while their reflections moved faintly across puddles beneath their feet. Avoiding a detailed answer, Yuki casually called it ordinary talk between men. Hatsushiro laughed gently and the tension faded. Returning from their visit with Shimizu, they continued walking beneath the cloudy sky while sharing lighter conversation. Hatsushiro suddenly shifted toward a more serious subject. Lowering her voice, she asked whether Yuki believed he might somehow be responsible for her father's arrest. The question cut through the silence, and Yuki stiffened while considering a possibility he could neither immediately deny nor accept. As they continued through the hallway, Yuki eventually responded. He admitted feeling some guilt, but tried not to dwell on it, also acknowledging how much he owed Fuji. Hatsushiro stayed close beside him and tried to reassure him despite struggling with feelings of her own. A framed photograph showed Hatsushiro's mother smiling while holding a child. Yuki glanced at the image and remembered the conversation from the day before. The photograph revealed another piece of the family history that neither had fully spoken about. Inside the quiet room, the two sat down together. After a short pause, Yuki faced Hatsushiro directly and expressed his wish for both of them to finally share everything they had kept hidden about the past. Hatsushiro lowered her eyes before speaking with quiet pain. Ever since the day she believed her selfish actions caused her mother's death, she had tried to fill the empty place her mother left behind. A faint smile hid her heartbreak while she explained that this goal had eventually become her entire purpose. Despite all her effort, she had failed to restore what was lost. Her father remained alone and trapped by sorrow, far from the happiness she wanted to bring back. Yuki listened without interrupting, increasingly concerned. Hatsushiro's kindness had always impressed him, but now he understood why it could also be frightening. Shimizu had been right that she carried far too much responsibility and pain for someone her age. Without saying anything else, Yuki stepped forward and embraced her.
He promised that from this point onward he would remain beside her and wanted to become someone who brought her happiness, so she would no longer carry every burden alone. Resting against his embrace, Hatsushiro quietly answered. There was no uncertainty left in her voice, only sincere acceptance as she softly said yes. Held firmly in Yuki's arms, Hatsushiro finally allowed herself to smile. Warmth began replacing the weight she had carried for years, and she quietly confessed how much had already changed inside her. Still holding her close, Yuki reminded Hatsushiro not to make him her only purpose in life. He encouraged her to discover new experiences and happiness beyond their relationship. She calmly agreed, and the idea of enjoying ordinary life gave her something unfamiliar: hope. The atmosphere lightened when Hatsushiro met his gaze and smiled. She gently asked whether they could continue walking through life together, not merely as a question but as a sincere wish to remain connected. Yuki answered immediately and held her even closer. His voice remained gentle but certain. Whatever challenges appeared in the future, he promised they would face them together. Their eyes met, and silence filled the room. Nothing else needed to be said. Yuki admitted that he also could not bear the thought of separating from her, and a relationship born from pain had grown into something stronger through understanding. Morning began as routinely as ever. Yusuke woke just before his alarm, turned it off before it could ring, climbed out of bed, and immediately started the same practice routine in complete silence. Without much thought, he ate leftover convenience store food. There were no greetings or words of gratitude, only juice and onigiri consumed as part of the daily pattern. His school bag had already been packed the night before, allowing him to move automatically. Outside, Yusuke read a textbook while walking and continued pursuing his dream of becoming a doctor. Nobody called goodbye when he left. His life rarely changed, and each solitary morning looked almost exactly like the one before it. Now sitting across the table from Hatsushiro, Yusuke remembered that repetitive existence almost as though it belonged to another person. He smiled faintly while describing the nostalgic dream because it reminded him clearly of who he used to be. Hatsushiro listened quietly from across the table. She tried imagining the lonely Yusuke from before they met, a version of him that now seemed almost impossible to picture. Reaching toward the tray, she reflected on how much both their lives had changed. During breakfast, Yusuke considered how different everything had become in only 3 months. The possibility that Kotori might attend the same school made the morning unexpectedly emotional. Across from him, Kotori also thought about those rapid changes. Their conversation shifted toward the principal, whose quiet assistance had been essential during the difficult period. Speaking sincerely, Kotori reminded Yusuke that they should never forget how much support he had given them. Back then the principal had bowed deeply before both of them with a regretful expression. He apologized for failing to recognize the situation sooner. Kotori attempted to reassure him, but guilt regarding his friend's actions remained evident in his voice. Kotori had been left with very few choices. Returning to her previous school was impossible because rumors had spread too widely. Recognizing the difficulty, the principal gently presented another option that could give her a new path forward. With kindness, he asked whether Kotori would consider transferring schools. Surprised but composed, she gratefully accepted. Yusuke sat beside her and witnessed the decision that would bring their futures even closer together. Over breakfast, Kotori cheerfully declared that she wanted to attend the same school as Yusuke. Speaking lightly but with determination, she promised to work hard enough to pass the entrance examination. Kotori brightly called him senpai, and the teasing word affected Yusuke far more than expected. Completely flustered, he dramatically collapsed to the floor while Kotori watched with innocent confusion, unaware of why such a simple title had overwhelmed him. Yusuke reflected on the person he had once been and admitted how empty his old routine felt. He studied almost mechanically, driven by ambition but lacking any real joy or purpose beyond achievement. Looking back now made that hollowness obvious. Everything was different now. Sitting with Kotori and eating the breakfast she prepared gave Yusuke something genuine to anticipate every morning. Sharing ordinary time with her had become a new source of motivation, and he jokingly declared her cooking his reason to live. Their shared days contained many small but meaningful moments: morning greetings, returning home, and holding hands before sleeping. Living nearby allowed them to grow closer, turning once empty routines into comforting memories they could genuinely treasure. With a gentle smile, Yusuke stated that anything connected to Kotori had become another reason for him to enjoy life. There was no hesitation in his words. Pleased with his own progress, Yusuke clenched a fist in celebration. For once, he had managed to say something bold without stumbling over himself. Some embarrassment remained, but he had overcome the nervousness that usually stopped him and teasingly asked Kotori to show her flustered side. To his surprise, Kotori leaned toward him holding a spoon. Without warning, and with complete calm, she told him to open his mouth. The sudden reversal left Yusuke speechless, frozen for a moment as he wondered whether he heard correctly. Kotori explained that feeding him was a small reward for saying something so kind. Her expression stayed sincere and almost innocent. Yusuke's heart raced as he watched her lift the spoon, unable to stop thinking about how adorable she looked. Eventually Yusuke accepted and leaned forward to take the bite from her spoon. In that quiet, playful moment, an ordinary breakfast suddenly became much more intimate, with one simple exchange bringing them even closer together. Overcome by the taste, Yusuke slowly set down his chopsticks. The food was more than delicious, it felt deeply comforting. Before he could stop himself, he admitted how fortunate he felt. When Kotori asked whether he liked it, his obvious nod revealed everything. Trying to recover his composure, Yusuke remembered that he had originally intended to embarrass her. Clearly, the entire plan had backfired while Kotori calmly continued eating, seemingly unaware of his internal struggle. Then Yusuke noticed a small detail. Kotori's ears were faintly red. Curiosity took over, and he leaned closer to ask her to face him. She hesitated before suddenly covering her face with both hands, trying unsuccessfully to hide her reaction. Eventually, Kotori turned toward him. Her cheeks were flushed and her expression stiff with embarrassment. Yusuke could barely suppress his laughter after finally catching her in the same kind of emotional trap she had created for him. Kotori fled toward the sink in embarrassment, moving awkwardly while Yusuke called after her playfully. Now that the opportunity had reversed, he promised that next time he would be the one feeding her. Standing beside Kotori, Yusuke quietly appreciated how simple everything felt. Eating together, cleaning dishes, and sharing casual conversation had become his new daily life. Reaching over to help, he found himself thinking that this must be what happiness felt like. Small arguments, teasing comments, and easy laughter had gradually filled Yusuke's days. Without realizing it, he had always wanted this kind of warmth. What once seemed like a repetitive life now felt emotionally alive, and everything had changed after meeting Kotori. A memory returned of how he once merely followed routine: study, eat, sleep, repeat. Then, without understanding why, Yusuke had gradually started wanting something more meaningful from life. While tidying the room, Kotori noticed a pink envelope attached to the wall. Curious, she asked what it was. Yusuke looked toward it and only remembered the item after she mentioned it. He casually explained that it was meant for a regular report. The envelope itself looked ordinary, but the word report made Kotori curious and hinted that Yusuke might still have another personal story he had not shared. When Kotori later returned from outside, the pink envelope again caught her attention. She opened it and immediately recognized Yusuke's formal handwriting. Inside were his usual structured updates about grades, health, money, and everyday matters. She lifted an eyebrow before smiling and reading the page quietly in the center of the room. Something felt different this time. The letter seemed less like a formal status report and more like something personal that he genuinely wanted her to know. Covering part of her face, Kotori let out an embarrassed laugh. Using an entire A4 page for such a simple announcement almost made her question his judgment. Even so, she could clearly feel the sincerity behind the effort. Finally, the important message appeared. Yusuke proudly announced that he had gotten a girlfriend, and he wrote it twice. Kotori's expression softened as the awkward but heartfelt growth in him filled her chest with warmth.